If you're ready to rest, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax your body, and drift into a slower time. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. You're standing in a Viking longhouse, and let me tell you, it's not quite the party you might imagine from watching too many Hollywood movies. Forget the idea of wild, helmeted barbarians. These folks were more like the engineers of their time, figuring out how to survive winters that could chill even the hardiest warrior to the bone. You see, when it came to surviving the cold, Vikings were as clever as they were fierce. They had to be. The climate of Scandinavia makes modern-day Minnesota look like a tropical paradise. Step inside one of these longhouses. It's like entering a wooden cocoon. Longhouses were the Viking answer to extreme weather, and they were built with the precision of a master craftsman. These structures were generally around 15 to 75 feet long, which might sound like a cozy space. But remember, this was home to not just a person or two, but an extended family, and possibly a few animals. Yes, the livestock were often brought inside during particularly brutal nights. Nothing like waking up to the smell of cow to remind you of your place in the pecking order. The walls were made of wooden planks or logs lined with peat. Ah, peat. The unsung hero of Viking insulation. The spongy material, harvested from boggy areas, was the ancient equivalent of your triple-glazed windows. Peat not only kept the warmth in, but also added a layer of soundproofing. That's right. When the winds howled like a banshee outside, you and your Viking pals could still enjoy a somewhat peaceful night's sleep. Now, let's not kid ourselves, this wasn't exactly the lap of luxury, but Vikings had their priorities straight. They knew that warmth was life. In the centre of the longhouse, you'd find the hearth, a long, narrow fire that ran down the length of the building. This was the heart of the home, literally and metaphorically. It was where meals were cooked and stories were shared. And believe it or not, smoke-filled air actually provided some insulation. Though the smell of burnt wood might have been a small price to pay for not freezing to death. And while we're talking about the hearth, let's debunk a myth right here. The Vikings weren't reckless savages who spent all their time looting and pillaging. They were resourceful pragmatists, and their survival tactics prove it. They utilized every square inch of their homes, and their communal way of living was a smart adaptation to their harsh environment. Being packed together like sardines wasn't just for warmth, it was a practical way to preserve resources. Less space to heat, fewer resources wasted. In these dimly lit longhouses, Vikings also had an eye for style. Gothic chic, if you will. The furniture was sparse but sturdy, often carved out of oak, and the bedding was made from animal skins and wool. Not exactly memory foam, but it did the trick. Imagine sleeping on a pile of furs and knowing that every fibre was working to insulate you from temperatures that could drop well below freezing. Now, you might be wondering about the smell. With the fire constantly burning and the occasional livestock guest, the aroma inside was earthy. But Vikings weren't as grimy as you might think. They bathed regularly, at least by medieval standards, often in natural hot springs. So, while the ambience might have been more rustic than spa-like, they were quite aware of hygiene. And let's talk about the communal aspect. The idea that every Viking was a lone wolf, prowling the icy tundra in search of plunder, doesn't hold water. They depended on each other for survival, and that meant sharing everything from food to warmth. Living in close quarters fostered a sense of community and cooperation. They were more like a well-oiled machine than a band of unruly marauders. Now, let's put a little context around all this. They didn't just build these longhouses for fun. The Vikings were navigating a world where the climate was a formidable adversary. During the Little Ice Age, which kicked off around the 14th century, temperatures dipped even lower, making their architectural ingenuity even more vital. They were masters of adapting to the environment, using what was available to them to ensure survival. So next time you hear the word Viking, picture this. A group of people huddled together in a wooden fortress, the fire crackling as they share stories and warmth, weathering the storm outside. They weren't just brawlers with a penchant for raiding, they were community-focused, technologically savvy, and above all, human. They survived not just because of their strength, but because of their ability to adapt and innovate. And that, my friend, is why they didn't just endure their world, they conquered it. And speaking of conquering, Let's talk textiles. Specifically, how the Vikings mastered the art of not freezing their buns off in the icy Scandinavian winters. When those brutal winds were howling, you'd be thanking Odin for every fibre of that woolen tunic. Forget the metal helmets and chainmail. The real Viking armour was made of wool, fur, and layer upon layer of practical fashion. Let's face it, the Vikings weren't marching into battle in their Sunday best. They dressed for survival, and that meant knowing their textiles like a modern fashionista knows their designer labels. Wool was the MVP of Viking attire. We're talking about a material so versatile and hardy that it could probably withstand a rock concert mosh pit, let alone a Nordic blizzard. Wool was everywhere in Viking life, from cloaks and tunics to those cosy socks that probably never made it into any epic saga but were crucial nonetheless. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Textile production in the Viking Age was a community affair, kind of like a medieval knitting circle on steroids. Spinning and weaving weren't just hobbies, they were lifelines. Every piece of clothing was painstakingly crafted, often taking weeks to complete. Picture a group of Viking women. Yes, it was primarily women, gathered around, spinning wool into thread using spindles and distaffs. It was a process that demanded skill and patience, and it was central to their survival. And let's not forget weaving. The warp-weighted loom was the tool of choice, a contraption that looks like it could double as a medieval torture device. But this was no instrument of pain, it was a machine of creation. Weaving on one of these looms involved threading yarn through vertical threads, the warp using a horizontal thread, the weft. It was labour-intensive, yes, but it transformed raw wool into fabric, a transformation as magical as any Norse myth. Now, about those layers. Vikings were all about layering, long before it became a fashion statement. A typical outfit might include an undertunic, a main tunic, and, if you were really fancy or it was really cold, a cloak. Cloaks could be fastened with a brooch, which wasn't just decorative, it was functional, keeping that vital outer layer snug against the chill. And let's not forget the hats. Viking helmets with horns? Pure fiction. But woolen hats? Absolutely essential. Fur, too, played a starring role in the Viking wardrobe. The fur of choice was reindeer or fox, and it served as the ultimate winter accessory. It was used to line cloaks and boots, adding an extra layer of insulation. Imagine trudging through snowdrifts with fur-rimmed boots, practical and, dare I say, a bit stylish. Vikings might not have been strutting down any Parisian catwalks, but they knew how to dress for their runway, the frozen tundra. But wait, there's more. Wool wasn't just keeping the Vikings cozy, it was also a hot commodity. The Norse economy thrived on this fluffy fabric. Wool was traded far and wide, reaching places as distant as the Byzantine Empire. It wasn't just a material, it was money. And here's a fun fact. The word wool shares its roots with wealth. In Norse society, being able to produce and trade wool was akin to having a robust stock portfolio today. Let's talk economics for a minute. In a time when coinage was limited, bartering was the name of the game. Wool was a key player in this barter economy, exchanged for goods and services across Europe. It fueled a network of trade routes that spanned from the chilly fjords of Norway to the bustling markets of Constantinople. And these trade connections weren't just about stuff. They were conduits for ideas, technology, and culture. Wool was literally weaving the world together. Now, let's myth-bust a bit. The romantic notion of a Viking warrior clad in animal skins and swinging a battle axe is compelling, sure, but a bit of a Hollywood fabrication. The reality was more about pragmatism than panache. Vikings wore what they needed to survive, and their clothing was as much a tool as their weapons. They were practical, forward-thinking, and, above all, survivors. Their wardrobe choices were strategic, not just aesthetic. So, the next time you pull on a wool sweater or bundle up in a scarf, spare a thought for the Vikings. Those ancient Norse navigators knew the value of good textiles. They weren't just surviving their environment, they were mastering it, one woolen thread at a time. And while their sagas might sing of epic battles and legendary voyages, the real story lies in the humble act of weaving warmth from the fibres of the earth. We'll pick up more threads of this Viking tapestry in the next part, so stay tuned to see how these textile titans continue to shape their world. Now, speaking of mastering their world, let's dive into the Viking pantry. Forget that image of horn-helmed warriors chowing down on endless meat feasts like it's Thanksgiving every day. The reality was more like a culinary chess game where every move had to be calculated to outwit the next winter storm. Picture this: a Viking winter where the days are as short as a Twitter thread and the nights stretch on like a binge-watch session of your favorite series. The land is blanketed in snow and crops are just a distant memory of warmer months. This is the time when the Vikings' survival instincts really shone. Their diet was a matter of life and death, and their approach to food was as strategic as any battle plan. Let's start with the basics. In the warmer months, the Viking diet was pretty varied. They had access to grains like barley, rye, and oats. Think of them as the holy trinity of Viking carbs. These grains were the backbone of their meals, turned into bread, porridge, or even the occasional ale. The Vikings also enjoyed a good helping of vegetables when they could get them. Cabbage, peas, and beans were their go-to greens. But as winter tightened its icy grip, the menu had to adapt. Fresh produce was off the table, literally, and this is where the Vikings' knack for food preservation came into play. Forget your fancy vacuum sealers and deep freezers. These folks were the OGs of preserving food. They had three main tricks up their fur-lined sleeves: smoking, salting, and fermenting. Let's talk smoking first. No, not the kind that involves cigarettes and rebellious teenagers, but the age-old art of turning fresh meat into something that could last through the darkest days of winter. Fish and meat was smoked over a fire, giving them that rich, smoky flavour while also keeping bacteria at bay. It was a bit like having a medieval charcuterie board minus the Instagram filter. Then there was salting. Salt was the Viking version of gold dust. It was essential for preserving meat, and the process was as simple as it was effective. Pack the meat in salt, wait, and voila! Your food is now ready to withstand the winter apocalypse. Salted fish and meats were staples, and they were often paired with hearty rye bread that could double as a blunt weapon in a pinch. Now, fermentation might sound like something you'd hear about in a trendy Brooklyn bistro, but the Vikings were fermenting long before it was cool. They made sauerkraut from cabbage and fermented dairy products like skyr, a yogurt-like cheese that was both nutritious and long-lasting. This was survival food at its finest, packed with nutrients and able to last for months. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that feasting was the exception, not the rule. Most of the time, Viking meals were simple, repetitive, and, let's be honest, a bit bland. It was about sustenance, not indulgence. Those grand banquets you see in pop culture? More myth than meal plan? Sure, there were celebrations and gatherings, but they were special occasions, not everyday events. Now, let's sprinkle in a dash of economic context. Food in the Viking Age wasn't just about survival, it was about trade and power. The ability to grow, preserve, and trade food was a sign of wealth and influence. Vikings traded their preserved foods far and wide, establishing connections that reached as far as the Middle East. A barrel of salted fish could be as valuable as a chest of silver, and it was a commodity that helped fuel the Viking economy. But the Vikings' relationship with their environment was more than just transactional. They understood the land and its limits, adopting a symbiotic approach to their resources. This was not a society that pillaged its own backyard. Instead, they worked with what they had, respecting the cycles of nature and adapting their lifestyles to fit the harsh realities of their climate. And here's where we debunk another myth: Vikings as reckless resource hogs. In truth, they were shrewd managers of their environment. Archaeological evidence suggests they practiced crop rotation and animal husbandry to maintain the fertility of their land. They didn't just take from nature, they nurtured it, ensuring that their communities could thrive even in the harshest conditions. Primary sources like the sagas and skaldic poetry offer glimpses into this intricate dance with the environment. These texts, while often infused with legend, also reveal a deep respect for the natural world. They speak of the seasons, the cycles of sowing and reaping, and the ever-present challenge of surviving the long, dark winters. So, the next time you sit down to a meal, think of the Vikings. Their approach to food was a masterclass in resourcefulness and resilience. They didn't just endure their environment, they thrived in it, using every ounce of their ingenuity to turn scarcity into sustenance. It's a story of survival that's both gritty and inspiring. a testament to human adaptability and the enduring spirit of a people who face the harshest of elements with grit and determination. As we continue to unravel the Viking saga, keep in mind that their legacy is more than just tales of conquest and adventure. It's a story of innovation, community, and the unyielding will to survive against the odds. And the best part? There's still more to discover as we explore the remaining threads of this captivating history. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the extraordinary world of the Vikings, where every meal was a triumph over the elements and every winter a battle won. Now, as we navigate the frosty terrain of Viking society, let's remember this. Surviving a Scandinavian winter was as much about social bonds as it was about woolen tunics and salted fish. Imagine a world where your neighbours aren't just the folks you awkwardly nod to over the fence, but your lifeline in the dead of winter. That's Viking community for you. A network of kinship ties and social obligations woven tighter than the thickest wool. In Viking society, kinship wasn't just about blood relations. It was a sprawling web that included extended family, allies, and even sworn brothers. Loyalty and mutual support were the glue holding these groups together. Your third cousin twice removed might be a bit of a bore at feasts, but come winter, they could be the reason you don't end up as an icicle. The Norse had a term for this, atta, a kind of superfamily that would make modern Facebook friend lists look like child's play. Let's talk about those communal gatherings. They weren't just excuses to drink mead and swap tales of daring do. These were strategic survival meetings. Picture the longhouse filled with the warmth of bodies and the steady hum of voices. This was where alliances were forged and disputes settled. It was like a medieval version of a United Nations summit, but with more fur and fewer bureaucrats. And speaking of disputes, enter the Thing. No, not the 1980s horror movie creature, but a fundamental part of Viking political life. The Thing was an assembly where free men gathered to discuss laws, settle disputes, and allocate resources. Think of it as a combination town hall meeting and courtroom drama with a dash of soap opera intrigue. It ensured that even in the harshest of times, society didn't descend into chaos. Instead, it was a well-oiled machine, maintaining order and balance. The Thing was crucial, because it wasn't just about governance, it was about community cohesion. Remember, these folks couldn't just pop down to the supermarket for a loaf of bread. Resource management was serious business. The Thing helped allocate scarce resources fairly, ensuring no one family stockpiled all the smoked fish while others starved. It was a system that, while imperfect, provided a semblance of stability. Now, let's debunk the myth of the lone Viking adventurer, charging into the unknown with nothing but bravado and a battle-axe. The reality was far less romantic and much more interconnected. Independence was valued, sure, but interdependence was essential. No Viking was an island. They were more like nodes in a vast network. Kinship ties extended beyond mere survival. They were economic lifelines too. Marriages were strategic, knitting together powerful families in alliances that strengthened economic and social standing. This wasn't just about love under the northern lights, it was about securing your place in the tapestry of Viking society. And then there were the communal feasts. Forget the idea of endless hedonism. These gatherings were as much about maintaining social bonds as they were about enjoying a hearty meal. Feasting was a way to reinforce alliances and display generosity, a crucial aspect of Viking honour. In a world where reputation was everything, being seen as a generous host could elevate your status faster than you could say "skål." The social fabric of Viking life was complex, a blend of necessity and tradition. The tales of epic lone warriors might make for great storytelling, but they overshadow the reality of a deeply communal society. Vikings survived not just through strength and cunning, but by leaning on each other, sharing resources, and maintaining a delicate balance of power and obligation. Let's add a layer of economic context. You see, kinship wasn't just a matter of familial ties, it was a form of capital. The richer your network, the more resources you could access. This was a society where reputation and relationships were as valuable as gold. A good word from a respected elder could open doors, or in this case, longhouse doors. Now, let's sprinkle some myth, busting on the popular image of the Viking as a solitary conqueror. The truth is, Viking expeditions were often communal endeavours. Ships were crewed by members of the same community, bound by ties of kinship and mutual obligation. Success wasn't just personal glory, it was shared wealth and security for the entire group. In these tightly knit communities, social obligations were taken seriously. If you welcomed a guest, you were bound to provide them with food and shelter, a practice called guest right. This wasn't just about hospitality, it was a social contract. Break it, and you risked more than just a tongue lashing. You could find yourself ostracized, cut off from the support network that was crucial for survival. As we peel back the layers of Viking society, it's clear that their world was far more nuanced than the legends suggest. They were a people who understood the power of community, the importance of political structures, and the necessity of shared resources. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in a world that demanded cooperation and ingenuity. So, next time you think of Vikings, don't just picture the lone warrior. Picture the community, the gatherings, the intricate dance of social and political maneuvering. Picture a society that managed to carve out a life in one of the harshest climates on Earth, not just through strength, but through a deep understanding of the power of human connection. And as we continue to explore their story, remember that the Vikings were more than just figures of legend. They were complex, resourceful, and deeply interconnected, a testament to the enduring power of community. Stay tuned as we delve even deeper into the intricacies of their world, where every relationship was a lifeline and every winter a testament to their resilience. So, as we delve even deeper into the intricacies of their world, let's reflect on how these Vikings, these supposed marauders of the northern seas, were actually laying the groundwork for something far grander than just survival. Their strategies for enduring those biting winters weren't just acts of necessity, but were the blueprints for expansion and influence. Let's start with their most iconic tool, the longship. This wasn't just a boat, it was the Viking calling card, a sleek marvel of nautical engineering. These vessels, often about 75 feet long, were the sports cars of the sea. With the ability to navigate both shallow rivers and open ocean, the longship was instrumental in the Vikings' ability to explore, trade, and yes, occasionally raid. But let's not pigeonhole them as mere pirates. These ships weren't just about plunder, they were about connection. They facilitated trade routes that stretched from the icy fjords of Norway to the bustling bazaars of Baghdad. Now, about those trade routes. The Vikings were the maritime networkers of their age, and their routes were like the Silk Road of the sea. They weren't just exchanging goods, they were swapping ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. The Viking Age saw the Norse influence spread like wildfire, reaching as far as North America. And here's a fun fact. A single Viking trader could cover as much ground as a modern-day cargo plane, albeit at a more leisurely pace. Consider the economic implications of this maritime prowess. The Vikings weren't just taking, they were giving back to the world economy. They traded fur, amber, and of course, wool, and in return they brought back silver, spices, and silk. It was a two-way street of cultural and economic exchange. This wasn't just about acquiring wealth, it was about establishing the Norse as serious players on the world stage. And let's debunk another myth while we're at it. The image of Vikings as isolated nature-battling hermits couldn't be further from the truth. They were internationalists, cosmopolitans of the cold. Their voyages were not just about conquest, but about curiosity and commerce. They adopted and adapted elements from the cultures they interacted with, and this exchange enriched their own society. Politically, these voyages laid the groundwork for something even more significant, the spread of Norse influence and the establishment of settlements across the North Atlantic and beyond. Settlements like those in Iceland, Greenland, and even a brief stint in Newfoundland. Vinland, if you're feeling particularly Norse today, were more than just dots on a map. They were outposts of Viking culture and influence. And what about the cultural legacy? Scandinavian countries today continue to embody many of the survival strategies honed by their ancestors. The Vikings' emphasis on community and cooperation echoes in modern Nordic social policies. Take the Nordic welfare model, for example. Social safety nets that would make any Viking chieftain nod in approval. It's a legacy of prioritizing communal well-being over individual gain. Let's not ignore the modern economic echoes either. Norway's robust maritime industries and Denmark's shipping prowess are the direct descendants of Viking seafaring skills. These countries' ability to pivot and adapt to the global economy is, in many ways, a continuation of the Viking spirit of innovation and exploration. And as we wrap up this saga, let's reflect on what this all means. The Vikings weren't just surviving their world, they were shaping it, leaving behind a legacy that continues to ripple through history. Their adaptability, resilience, and communal spirit paint a picture far richer and more nuanced than the old tales of horned helmets and pillaging hordes. So next time you bundle up in your wool sweater, or perhaps indulge in a Scandinavian-based crime drama, think of the Vikings. Remember how their ingenuity in the face of adversity laid the groundwork for a legacy that endures to this day. They were not just raiders of the North, but architects of a lasting cultural and economic impact. Proof that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit can not only survive, but thrive. And with that, our voyage through the cold, dark nights of Viking history draws to a close, leaving us with a rich tapestry of tales, truths, and enduring lessons. Skål to that. In the bustling heart of 14th century China, where emperors ruled with an iron grip and tea was just starting to steal the spotlight from wine, a peculiar transformation was taking place. It wasn't gold or spices that were capturing imaginations. It was something far more fragile, yet just as valuable, porcelain. Yes, those delicate bowls and vases that might now seem like mere dust collectors on your grandma's shelf were once the rock stars of global trade, and the Ming dynasty was their biggest promoter. Now, before you roll your eyes at yet another tale of ancient pottery, let's get one thing straight. Ming porcelain was anything but your average kitchenware. It was the 14th century equivalent of having the latest iPhone. A status symbol that screamed, "I've made it." If you had a Ming vase, you were basically the medieval version of a Kardashian. What made these porcelain pieces so special? Enter kaolin clay, the secret sauce in this ceramic recipe. Named after the Chinese village of Gaoling, this clay was to porcelain what hops are to beer, essential. When mixed with petunsi, a type of feldspathic rock, kaolin clay could be fired at temperatures soaring above 1,250 degrees Celsius. The result? A translucent, glass-like finish that was as strong as it was beautiful. Who knew dirt could be so glamorous? But let's not kid ourselves. The road to porcelain fame wasn't paved with unicorns and rainbows. It was more like a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons. The Ming dynasty, which ruled from 1368 to 1644, was a time of intense political maneuvering and power struggles. The porcelain industry became a pawn in these dynastic chess games, caught between the desires of emperors and the ambitions of merchants. Emperor Hongwu, the dynasty's founder, had a vision for China that included a tightly controlled economy. He recognized porcelain as a lucrative export that could fill the imperial coffers with silver. And boy, did it. By the 16th century, porcelain exports were bringing in more wealth than a Black Friday sale at an electronics store. The porcelain trade became an economic powerhouse, fueling not just the dynasty's ambitions, but also its everyday operations. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Back in those early days, porcelain was still a budding industry. It wasn't until the reign of the Yongle Emperor in the early 15th century that things really kicked into high gear. Yongle, who had a penchant for exploration and expansion, he sent out the famous Admiral Zheng He on his 7 voyages, saw porcelain as a way to project China's soft power across the globe. He wasn't just selling bowls, he was selling a piece of China's soul, neatly packaged in white and blue. As porcelain began to conquer dining rooms from Beijing to Baghdad, it also became a tool of diplomacy. Gifting porcelain was akin to giving a foreign dignitary the keys to a luxury car. It was both an expression of wealth and a strategic move to win favor. The intricate designs, often featuring dragons, phoenixes, and floral motifs, were not just decorative. They were laden with symbolism, conveying messages of power, harmony, and imperial authority. But let's pause for a reality check. While it's easy to get swept away by the romance of this porcelain saga, life in Ming China wasn't all about sipping tea from dainty cups. The porcelain industry, like any booming business, had its dark side. For the labourers toiling in the kilns of Jingdezhen, the epicenter of porcelain production, life was a relentless grind. These workers, often poor and overworked, faced dangerous conditions and long hours. It's a harsh reminder that behind every piece of fine art lies a story of sweat and sacrifice. And speaking of Jingdezhen, this city was the Silicon Valley of porcelain, a hotbed of innovation and craftsmanship. Kilns dotted the landscape, each belching smoke like a dragon with indigestion. It was here that the magic happened, where artisans perfected their craft and pushed the limits of what could be achieved with clay and fire. The city became a hub of cultural and technological exchange, attracting skilled workers and traders from across the empire. So, as porcelain began its ascent to the throne of global trade, it wasn't just about bowls and vases. It was about the people who made them, the emperors who commissioned them, and the traders who sold them. It was about an entire ecosystem of creativity, commerce, and cunning, woven together by the delicate threads of clay. In the end, Ming porcelain wasn't just a product, it was a phenomenon. It captured the imagination of a world hungry for beauty and sophistication. But it also stood as a testament to the complexity and contradictions of its time, a world where art and ambition, beauty and brutality walked hand in hand. And that, perhaps, is what makes its story so compelling. While Ming porcelain was a phenomenon wrapped in allure and prestige, let's take a stroll down to the underbelly of this glittering industry, the workshops of Jingdezhen. This city was like the Hogwarts of ceramics, minus the wands and broomsticks. But what it really had was a ton of kilns, and a workforce that would make today's gig economy look like a vacation in the Bahamas. Now, let's clear up one of the biggest myths that's been floating around like a stray balloon at a kid's party, the idea of the lone artisan, toiling away in the dead of night, crafting a masterpiece by candlelight. Reality check. The production of Ming porcelain was about as solitary as a mosh pit at a rock concert. Jingdezhen was a buzzing hive of activity, with a labour force that could rival the population of a small country. We're talking thousands of workers, each with a specific role, producing porcelain on a scale that could stock a small planet. The process itself was a labyrinth of steps, each more intricate than the last. It all started with the mining of kaolin clay, which was about as back-breaking as it sounds. Workers would dig through the earth like it was a treasure hunt, except the prize was a sore back and a meagre wage. Once the clay was extracted, it was off to the grinders to be pulverized into a fine powder. And if you've ever tried turning a rock into dust, you'll know it's not exactly a walk in the park. This powder was then mixed with water, forming a paste that could be shaped into anything from a dainty teacup to a vase that could double as a small missile. But here's where things got really interesting. The shaping of the clay was a collaborative effort involving multiple hands. Think of it as the assembly line before Henry Ford made it cool. The artisans of Jingdezhen had their own version of teamwork, with each person specializing in a specific task. One would shape the body, another would attach the handles, and a third would apply the decorative motifs. It was a well-oiled machine, but one that ran on sweat and sheer determination. And speaking of decoration, let's not forget the iconic blue and white designs that have become synonymous with Ming porcelain. The cobalt blue pigment, imported from Persia, was worth its weight in gold, literally. This was no ordinary paint, it was a luxury item, and the artisans treated it as such. They painted with the precision of a brain surgeon, knowing that one slip could spell disaster. The designs were intricate and loaded with symbolism, turning each piece of porcelain into a canvas of cultural expression. Once the pieces were decorated, it was time for the firing process, which was about as nerve-wracking as waiting for your exam results. The kilns of Jingdezhen were massive structures, capable of reaching temperatures over 1,250 degrees Celsius. Think of them as medieval microwave ovens, but with a lot more fire and a lot less convenience. The firing process could take days, and the outcome was always uncertain. A single crack or imperfection could render an entire batch useless, sending months of hard work up in smoke. But let's talk about the people behind the magic, the unsung heroes who toiled in the shadows. Life for a porcelain worker was anything but glamorous. The hours were long, the conditions harsh, and the pay was a pittance. Yet, despite the challenges, these artisans took immense pride in their work. They were the backbone of an industry that put China on the map as the world's porcelain powerhouse. And here's the kicker. While the emperors and merchants reaped the rewards, the workers remained largely invisible, their contributions forgotten in the annals of history. It's a classic tale of the little guy powering the big machine, a story as old as time itself. The romance of Ming porcelain may lie in its beauty, but the reality is etched in the lives of those who created it. So, the next time you admire a piece of Ming porcelain, spare a thought for the hands that shaped it, the eyes that painted it, and the lives that were entwined in its making. Behind every elegant piece lies a world of grit and grind, a testament to human ingenuity and endurance. As we continue to unravel the tale of Ming porcelain, remember that it's a story of contrasts, where beauty and hardship dance a delicate waltz across the pages of history. As we tiptoe from the sweat-streaked workshops of Jingdezhen toward the grand stage of global trade, it's time to navigate the labyrinthine paths that carried Ming porcelain far beyond China's borders. Picture this: delicate vases and ornate dishes, lovingly crafted in the bowels of a smoky kiln, now embarking on a journey that would make Bilbo Baggins sweat. These weren't just any trade routes. These were the Silk Road and maritime paths, the ancient equivalent of a first-class ticket to the world stage. Let's kick things off with the Silk Road, that legendary stretch of land that wasn't really a road at all, but more like a sprawling network of trade routes, crisscrossing the continents like a game of pick-up sticks. This complex web connected China to Europe, and every camel-laden caravan was a lifeline of commerce. Picture traders trudging along, their camels laden with porcelain as precious as the latest iPhone, each piece wrapped in straw and packed in crates to withstand the rough and tumble of the journey. Now, let's talk numbers. By the 16th century, Ming porcelain was a hot commodity, accounting for a significant chunk of China's exports. We're talking tens of thousands of pieces shipped annually, each one a small fortune for those lucky enough to trade them. The Silk Road wasn't just a highway for goods, it was a conduit for ideas, cultures, and yes, even porcelain mania. The porcelain trade was like an ancient version of the internet, connecting distant lands in a flurry of commerce and communication. But let's not forget the maritime routes, the watery highways that turned oceans into a bustling bazaar. The Ming dynasty, with its fleet of treasure ships, was no slouch when it came to naval prowess. These ships, some as long as a football field, were commanded by the legendary Admiral Jing He. Imagine a flotilla of these behemoths, each carrying enough porcelain to stock a royal banquet, sailing the high seas with the swagger of a rock star on a world tour. These maritime routes were critical in shaping the global economy. The South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, and further on to the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf formed a watery corridor through which porcelain flowed like a never-ending river of prosperity. By the late Ming period, porcelain exports were a key driver of China's economy, bringing in silver from as far afield as Spain and the Americas. The exchange rate was simple. A kilo of porcelain could fetch its weight in silver, and in some cases even more. Talk about a lucrative trade. But while the romance of the Silk Road and maritime routes is undeniable, the reality was a tad less glamorous. These journeys were fraught with dangers. Pirates, storms, and treacherous terrain were just the beginning. And don't even get me started on the logistics. Imagine trying to keep thousands of fragile porcelain pieces intact over such distances. It was a logistical nightmare that would make a modern-day supply chain manager cry into their spreadsheets. Now, speaking of myths and legends, let's turn our gaze to Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant whose tales have fueled imaginations for centuries. Polo claimed to have visited China in the late 13th century, long before the Ming dynasty hit its porcelain stride. He spoke of the wonders of the East with such fervour that Europe was captivated. But did he really see Ming porcelain? Spoiler alert, not likely. The timeline doesn't add up, but let's not rain on Polo's parade too hard. His tales, whether fact or fiction, helped ignite Europe's fascination with the East, setting the stage for the porcelain craze that would follow. By the 17th century, Europe was in the throes of porcelain fever. Having a piece of Ming china was like having a Picasso on your wall, an instant status symbol. In the world of international diplomacy, gifting porcelain was akin to handing over a golden ticket. European courts scrambled to get their hands on these delicate treasures, using them to grease the wheels of alliances and treaties. It was diplomacy, with a dash of decor, who knew that a teacup could wield so much power. But let's not ignore the economic undercurrents. European merchants, recognizing the insatiable demand, were quick to cash in. The Dutch East India Company in particular was instrumental in shipping vast quantities of porcelain to Europe's eager elites. By the 1640s, the company was importing over 3 million pieces annually. Yes, 3 million. That's enough porcelain to serve tea to every man, woman and child in England at the time. Twice. Yet, the influx of porcelain wasn't just about quenching Europe's thirst for luxury. It was a catalyst for change, spurring innovation and competition. As the demand for porcelain soared, European potters scrambled to crack the secrets of its creation. The race was on, and in 1709, German alchemist Johann Friedrich Böttger finally unlocked the formula, giving birth to European porcelain, or white gold, as it was known. It was a seismic shift in the global market, and China's monopoly was suddenly under threat. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The journey of Ming porcelain from the kilns of Jingdezhen to the palaces of Europe is a tapestry woven with threads of commerce, culture, and cunning. It's a story of the human quest for beauty, power, and prestige. A story as relevant today as it was centuries ago. As we prepare to delve deeper into this porcelain adventure, remember that each piece of Ming china carries with it a slice of history, a testament to the artistry and ambition of those who dared to dream beyond their borders. And that, my friends, is the true legacy of Ming porcelain, an enduring symbol of a world forever in motion, always reaching for the next horizon. While Ming porcelain was busy making its mark on the global map back home in China, it was far more than just an export commodity. It was a cultural tour de force, influencing everything from art and fashion to, yes, even politics. Imagine it as the original influencer, a Kim Kardashian of the ceramics world, if you will. It was both a muse and a medium, shaping tastes and trends with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. First, let's chat about art. Ming porcelain wasn't just about pretty patterns, though let's not downplay those iconic blue and white designs that could make even a modern-day minimalist swoon. This porcelain was a canvas, one that showcased the artistic prowess of its time. The intricate motifs, ranging from dragons and lotus blossoms to scenes of bustling marketplaces, were not mere decoration. They were stories, rich with symbolism and meaning, reflecting China's societal values, beliefs, and aspirations. It was like scrolling through a 14th century Instagram feed, each piece telling its own tale. But the artistry didn't stop at the rim of a bowl. Ming porcelain inspired other art forms too. Painters and calligraphers were all about those delicate hues and intricate designs, incorporating them into their own work. It was a creative cross-pollination that saw porcelain motifs popping up in everything from silk tapestries to lacquerware. In a world without Pinterest, Ming porcelain was the pinboard, sparking ideas and setting trends across the creative spectrum. Now, let's talk fashion. Yes, porcelain even had its fingers in the sartorial pie. The delicate patterns and striking colours became the muse for textile designers, influencing the weaving of intricate brocades and embroideries. Picture elite courtiers swanning around in robes inspired by the very porcelain they sipped from. It was the height of sophistication, a declaration of taste and status that would make even the most jaded fashionista raise an eyebrow. In the fashion stakes, Ming porcelain was haute couture, a perpetual trendsetter in silk and glaze. But here's where things get really juicy politics. Ming porcelain was a diplomatic ace, a tool wielded by emperors to cement alliances and curry favour. Forget about summits and treaties. Back then the exchange of porcelain could seal a deal faster than you could say international relations. It was a strategic gift, a subtle yet powerful way to engage in the delicate dance of diplomacy. When the Yongle Emperor sent Zheng He on his voyages, those treasure ships weren't just packed with spices and silk. They carried porcelain, each piece a peace offering, a ceramic olive branch extended to foreign shores. And let's not forget the domestic scene. Within China, porcelain became a symbol of imperial power and legitimacy. The production and distribution of these porcelain pieces were tightly controlled by the state, a mechanism through which the emperor could assert his authority. By controlling its creation, the emperor not only bolstered the economy, but reinforced his image as the ultimate arbiter of taste and culture. It was power politics played out in porcelain, a testament to the subtle interplay between art and authority. Yet, while the allure of porcelain was undeniable, it also highlighted the stark divisions within society. The elite luxuriated in its beauty, while the labourers who created it remained largely unseen, their contributions obscured by the glow of imperial grandeur. It was a reminder that beneath the sheen of porcelain perfection lay the grit of human endeavour, a tale of disparity as relevant today as it was then. Now, if you think our ancestors were immune to the whims of fashion and status, think again. The porcelain frenzy was a precursor to today's consumer culture, complete with its own set of trends and must-haves. Ming porcelain was the 14th century equivalent of a viral TikTok trend, sweeping through society with a fervour that was as infectious as it was enduring. Collectors scrambled to own the latest designs, merchants jockeyed for a piece of the porcelain pie, and artists pushed the boundaries of their craft to meet the insatiable demand. Fast forward to today, and the parallels are striking. We may have swapped porcelain for smartphones and designer labels, but the underlying currents remain the same. Status symbols, whether they come in the form of a Ming vase or the latest tech gadget, continue to dictate our social hierarchies and cultural narratives. It's a timeless tale of human desire, the quest for beauty and prestige etched into the fabric of our collective consciousness. But let's not get too nostalgic. The porcelain craze was not without its pitfalls. As demand skyrocketed, the market was flooded with imitations, the ancient version of knockoff designer handbags. These fakes, though often skillfully crafted, lacked the authenticity and artistry of the real deal. It was a cautionary tale of supply and demand, a reminder that in the world of commerce, not all that glitters is gold, or in this case, not all that shines is porcelain. As we continue to unravel the legacy of Ming porcelain, let's remember that it's more than just a relic of the past. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of human society, a testament to our enduring fascination with art, power, and prestige. And while the story is far from over, it's clear that the allure of Ming porcelain will continue to captivate, a timeless symbol of a world forever in motion. And as we stand gazing at this kaleidoscope of history, it's time to bring Ming porcelain into the glaring spotlight of the present. Fast forward a few centuries, and what do we find? Those once coveted porcelain treasures are now museum pieces, their beauty preserved behind glass, like ancient influences still commanding a following. But here's the kicker. They're also inspiration for a wave of modern knockoffs, the kind you might find at a flea market next to dubious, genuine Rolex watches. It's a classic case of art meeting commerce, where the line between homage and imitation is as thin as a porcelain teacup. Let's start with the museums, those hallowed halls where history is curated and dusted off for the public eye. From the British Museum in London to the Palace Museum in Beijing, Ming porcelain holds court with the regal air of a monarch. But why do we choose to enshrine these pieces, to preserve them like relics of a lost civilization? Well, it's more than just nostalgia. Ming porcelain represents the zenith of Chinese craftsmanship, a pinnacle of aesthetic and technical achievement. Each piece is a snapshot of a bygone era, a tangible connection to a world that shaped the global trade landscape. And while we're on the subject of preservation, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the economic value. A single piece of authentic Ming porcelain can fetch millions at auction, enough to make even the most jaded art collector break into a cold sweat. In 2011, a Ming dynasty vase sold for a whopping $21.6 million at Sotheby's. That's enough to buy a small fleet of Ferraris, or, if you're feeling charitable, to fund a few lifetimes' worth of college tuition. The point is, these aren't just artifacts, they're investments, cultural stocks that appreciate over time. But let's not get too cozy with the romance of it all. For every genuine museum piece, there are countless replicas vying for attention and wallets. Enter the world of modern knockoffs, where the art of imitation is as much a craft as the original creations. Factories churn out replicas with the precision of a Swiss watch, each piece a testament to human ingenuity and the age-old desire to own a piece of the past. But here's the punchline. Some of these fakes are so convincing that even seasoned collectors have been duped. It's a testament to the enduring allure of Ming porcelain that even its copies can captivate and deceive. Let's pivot to the question of why. Why do we continue to create, buy, and display these pieces? At its core, it's about the allure of beauty and the status it confers. Ming porcelain, with its ethereal elegance and storied past, remains a symbol of sophistication and cultural cachet. It's the ultimate conversation starter, a testament to our shared human experience, where art and history intersect in a dance as delicate as the porcelain itself. But here's where things get interesting. In today's world, where authenticity is a buzzword and the past is often repackaged for mass consumption, Ming porcelain stands as a symbol of the tension between genuine artistry and mass production. It's a microcosm of our cultural values, a reflection of what we choose to preserve and why. The legacy of Ming porcelain is not just in its beauty, but in its ability to provoke thought and inspire debate. It challenges us to consider the value of authenticity in a world awash with replicas. Now, let's dive into the economics of it all. In the grand tapestry of global trade, Ming porcelain was a game-changer. It was the original luxury export, a commodity that fueled economies and shaped international relations. Today, its legacy continues to impact the art market, where demand for Chinese porcelain remains robust. In 2022, the global porcelain market was valued at approximately $9 billion, with projections to grow steadily. It's a testament to the timeless appeal of porcelain, a material that continues to captivate collectors and consumers alike. But let's not ignore the darker side of this porcelain saga. The production of replicas is often a cottage industry, with workers facing conditions reminiscent of their Ming dynasty predecessors. Low wages, long hours, and little recognition are the norm, a stark reminder that behind every piece of art, whether genuine or copied, lies a story of labor and sacrifice. It's a sobering reminder that beauty often comes with a price, one that's paid by those far removed from the auction houses and museums. As we wrap up this porcelain odyssey, let's reflect on the enduring legacy of Ming porcelain. It's a tale of beauty and craftsmanship, a story that transcends time and culture. But it's also a cautionary tale, a reminder of the complexities of art and commerce, where the line between genuine and imitation is often blurred. In a world obsessed with the new, Ming porcelain stands as a testament to the enduring power of the past, a symbol of our shared human history and the timeless quest for beauty and meaning. And so, as you sip your next cup of tea, perhaps from a porcelain mug inspired by those ancient designs, take a moment to appreciate the journey of Ming porcelain. It's a journey that began in the kilns of Jingdezhen and continues to captivate us today, a reminder that art, like life, is a delicate balance of beauty, history, and the stories we choose to tell. Ancient Rome had a soundtrack that was as grand and chaotic as the empire itself. If you were strolling through the bustling streets of Rome, you'd be serenaded by a symphony of sounds that could make a modern musician cringe or laugh out loud. The Romans, those lovers of excess and spectacle, borrowed heavily from their neighbours, the Etruscans and Greeks, to create a musical medley as colourful as their toga parties. Start with the Etruscans, those mysterious folks who seemed to have a knack for the arts. The Romans took cues from their northern neighbours, especially when it came to music. The Etruscans were the kind of people who would show up at a party with a lyre, a harp, and a penchant for dramatic flair. They loved their music loud and ceremonial, which translated well when the Romans decided to up the ante. They didn't just borrow the instruments, they took the Etruscan vibe and cranked it up to 11. But let's not forget the Greeks. The Greeks, the original rock stars of the ancient world. The Romans were like that kid in high school who desperately wanted to hang with the cool group. They adopted Greek music theory, instruments, and even some of their gods, just to fit in. The Greek aulos, a double-reeded instrument that looks like it could double as a weapon, was a particular favourite. It was like the electric guitar of its day, producing a sound that was both alluring and, let's be honest, borderline obnoxious. Picture a bagpipe getting into a shouting match with a clarinet, and you're halfway there. Speaking of instruments that could make a musician wince, enter the cornu. This massive curved horn was the ancient Roman equivalent of a vuvuzela. Used in military parades and gladiator games, its blaring sound was enough to wake the dead or at least terrify the living. The cornu was less about melody and more about volume, which was perfect for an empire that thrived on being larger than life. It was the brass voice of Roman authority, declaring to anyone within earshot that the empire was here, and it meant business. Now, let's talk social settings. Roman music wasn't just for the elite, it was the background score to everyday life. Picture the grandeur of a Roman banquet. These weren't just meals, they were endurance events, complete with courses that could make a modern, all-you-can-eat buffet look like a light snack. Music was a crucial ingredient. A good banquet had a soundtrack that ranged from soothing lyres to energetic percussion, all designed to keep the guests entertained, or at least awake, while they gorged themselves for hours. But the music didn't stop at the dinner table. Oh no, the streets of Rome were a constant festival of sound. Street musicians were the ancient buskers, playing for coins or just to add some flavour to the bustling markets. Festivals were a cacophony of music, dance, and probably a fair amount of wine-fueled chaos. Whether it was a religious procession or a victory celebration, music was the thread that tied the Roman social fabric together. Of course, where there's music, there's myth. The Romans, never ones to shy away from a good story, loved to romanticize their musical past. They liked to imagine their tunes echoing through time, a testament to their cultural might. The reality? Well, it was probably a bit more discordant than harmonious. The soundscape of ancient Rome was likely a mix of talent and enthusiasm, with the latter often drowning out the former. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The music of ancient Rome was as much about the people and their stories as it was about the notes and rhythms. It was a reflection of a society that was vibrant, chaotic, and utterly fascinating. So next time you hear a street musician trying to hit a high note, remember, they're just keeping an ancient tradition alive, one off-key orlos at a time. But let's crank the volume on the music scene in ancient Rome and dive into the economics that made it tick, or should I say, boom and crash. You see, Roman society had a unique knack for elevating the mundane into the extraordinary, and music was no exception. This wasn't just art for the sake of it. Music was big business, with professional musicians enjoying careers that could be surprisingly lucrative. Yes, even back then, if you played your cards or your instruments right, you could live like a rock star. Enter the world of patronage, where wealthy Romans played the role of Medici before it was cool. Patrons were the sugar daddies of the arts, funding musicians not out of the goodness of their hearts, but to boost their own social capital. Roman elites would hire musicians for private parties, public games, and religious ceremonies, essentially turning every event into a live concert. And these gigs? They didn't come cheap. A talented lyre player or an aulos virtuoso could command a hefty fee, sometimes equivalent to several months' wages for a labourer. That's right. Imagine earning in one night what a builder makes laying bricks for half a year. It's like the ancient version of a Vegas residency, minus the neon lights. But the coin didn't just flow one way. Investing in music was like buying stocks in social prestige. The more lavish the performance, the higher the applause, and the bigger the bragging rights. The costs of hiring musicians didn't end with their fees. You had to factor in the instruments themselves, which could cost a small fortune. A finely crafted lyre could set you back as much as a modest villa, and don't even get me started on the hydraulic organ. An engineering marvel that was as expensive as it was impressive. Now, let's talk about the street performers, those unsung heroes, quite literally, of the Roman music scene. For every musician living it up in a patron's villa, there were countless others hustling on the streets, playing for coins tossed by passers-by. Street performers were the Spotify buskers of their day, offering a soundtrack to Rome's vibrant street life, but without the luxury of a guaranteed paycheck. Their earnings were unpredictable, heavily dependent on the generosity or lack thereof of their audience. It was feast or famine, with the scales often tipping towards the latter. And here's where the beautiful myth collides with the gritty reality. While we might romanticize the notion of these musicians playing their hearts out under the Roman sun, the truth was less idyllic. The noise, the competition, the struggle for attention. It was a tough gig, literally. Yet, these performers were pivotal to the Roman cultural fabric, bringing music to the masses and keeping the spirit of the city alive. So why did they do it? Why subject themselves to the daily grind for a few measly coins? The answer is as old as time itself. For the love of the art and the hope of being discovered. Every street corner performance was an audition for the big leagues, a chance to catch the eye of a passing patron who might pluck them from obscurity and into the spotlight. Economically, this divide between the funded musicians and street performers paints a vivid picture of Roman society's haves and have-nots. It's a tale of two cities within one, the opulence of the elite set against the backdrop of everyday struggle. Yet both ends of this spectrum were essential to the soundtrack of ancient Rome. In this cacophony of financial ambition and artistic fervour, it's clear that music was more than just entertainment. It was a currency, a means of social mobility, and a powerful tool for self-expression. Whether in the grandeur of a villa or the hustle of a market, music was the heartbeat of Rome, pulsing through its veins with rhythm and resolve. As we continue to unravel the layers of this ancient world, remember that behind every note was a story of aspiration, survival, and the ever-present pursuit of glory. So stay tuned, because the next part promises even more insights into the music that made Rome resonate through the ages. And so, we waltz, or perhaps stumble into the political orchestra of ancient Rome, where music was less about melody and more about maneuvering power. This wasn't just a society of tuneful banquets and street serenades, oh no. Music was a tool, a weapon even, in the arsenal of emperors looking to score political points or drown out dissent. Think of it as the ancient version of a catchy campaign jingle, only with more trumpets and the occasional assassination plot. Let's start with the poster child for Roman musical misadventures, Emperor Nero. Now, Nero's reputation precedes him, and not in the best way. This is the guy famously and falsely accused of fiddling while Rome burned in 64 AD. Yes, that's right, the whole Nero fiddled while Rome burned line is more myth than fact. Historically speaking, the fiddle wasn't even invented until the Middle Ages, but let's not let historical accuracy get in the way of a good story. In reality, Nero was more of a lyre man, a passionate, if somewhat overconfident performer. Nero was an emperor who fancied himself a master of the arts, and by Jupiter he wanted everyone to know it. His performances were less about the music and more about the spectacle of power. Picture this, the emperor himself, clad in gold and glory, strumming his lyre in front of a captive audience that had no choice but to applaud, lest they find themselves in the less-than hospitable confines of the Roman prisons. It's said that Nero even took his act on the road, performing in Greece and bribing judges to win musical competitions, because when you're the emperor, why settle for anything less than first place? The thing about Nero was that he wasn't just playing music, he was playing politics. Every strum of the lyre, every note sung off-key, was a declaration of dominance. It was a reminder that he was not just an emperor, but a patron of the arts, a cultural icon in his own mind. Of course, the reality was a tad less glamorous. Nero's musical endeavours were often met with more eye rolls than applause, and his insistence on performing turned into a bit of a running joke among the Roman elite. Imagine your least favourite karaoke singer being the leader of the free world, and you'll get a sense of what Rome was dealing with. But Nero wasn't the only one to wield music as a political instrument. Other emperors took note, pun intended, and used music to sway public opinion. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, was a fan of using music to enhance the grandeur of his public appearances. He understood that music could evoke emotions and rally the masses, much like a modern-day soundtrack can turn a movie scene from mundane to epic. Augustus didn't need to strum a lyre himself. He had an entire empire to do his bidding. Instead, he used music to frame his reign in a positive light, commissioning works that celebrated his victories and virtues. And then there were the public games and festivals, those grandiose spectacles designed to both entertain and distract the populace. Here, music was as much about maintaining order as it was about merrymaking. The games were a chance for emperors to showcase their generosity and keep the citizens happy, or at the very least, occupied. With tens of thousands of spectators packed into massive arenas like the Colosseum, music played a crucial role in setting the mood and pacing the events. It was the ancient equivalent of a stadium DJ, pumping up the crowd and keeping the energy high. Of course, not every attempt at musical propaganda hit the right note. Some emperors, in their zeal to control the narrative, overplayed their hand. Caligula, for instance, was known for his eccentricities, and his use of music was no exception. He once ordered an entire section of the orchestra to be thrown into the sea because they played a note he didn't like. Talk about harsh criticism. It was these kinds of antics that often turned music from a tool of the state into a comedy of errors. Despite the occasional blunder, music remained a potent force in the political landscape of ancient Rome. It was a way to communicate with the masses, to celebrate victories, and to reinforce the power and prestige of the emperor. But behind the fanfare and public performances lay a complex web of political maneuvering and personal ambition. The emperors understood that music was more than just sound. It was a language, a means of expression that transcended words. The irony, of course, is that while music was used to project an image of control and prosperity, the reality was often far more chaotic. The emperors who wielded music as a tool of propaganda were often as out of tune with their people as they were with their instruments. Yet, in their attempts to harmonize their reigns with the cultural pulse of Rome, they left behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and amuse. As we tune into the next part of this historical symphony, remember that for every note played, there was a story waiting to be told, a tale of ambition, power, and the ever-present struggle for control. In the grand concert of Rome's history, music was more than just an accompaniment. It was a driving force, shaping the narrative and setting the stage for the drama that would unfold. So stay with us as we dive deeper into the world of Roman music, where the next act promises even more intrigue and insight into the empire that refused to stay silent. In the grand concert of Rome's history, music was more than just an accompaniment. It was a driving force, shaping the narrative and setting the stage for the drama that would unfold. But let's pull back the velvet curtain on the myth of the glamorous Roman musician and expose the less harmonious side of this melodious mythos. The average Roman musician's life was more hard knocks than high notes. While the image of a lyre strumming virtuoso serenading marble-clad aristocrats in opulent villas is appealing, the reality was often as gritty as a sandpaper solo. Musicians in ancient Rome had to navigate a society that valued their art when it suited them, but generally regarded them as second-class citizens when the music stopped. Sure, a talented musician might score a gig at a senator's dinner party, but let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a golden ticket to elite status. More often than not, musicians were slaves or freedmen working for patrons who saw them as little more than living entertainment systems. These patrons, who were the original influences of their day, wouldn't hesitate to cut ties if the music didn't quite hit the mark. It's a bit like being the opening act for a big-name band and getting booed off stage before you've even hit the chorus. And let's talk competition. If you thought your high school talent show was cutthroat, you haven't seen anything. The Roman music scene was a veritable battlefield, where musicians had to constantly outplay and out-entertain one another just to survive. Picture this: an Orlo's player pouring his soul into a performance, only to be upstaged by the next guy with a killer pan flute solo that leaves the audience in awe. It was a constant game of one-upmanship, each musician fighting for the fleeting attention and favor of the crowd and their coins. But what about those coins? Were they really worth the strife? Well, street musicians scraped together what they could from the generosity of passers-by, but it was hardly a living wage. On a good day, a busker might make enough to buy a loaf of bread and some olives. On a bad day, they'd be lucky to avoid a run-in with the local authorities, who weren't exactly known for their appreciation of impromptu street concerts. It's the ancient equivalent of playing in the subway and hoping the transit cops look the other way. And speaking of disdain, let's not gloss over the societal stigma attached to musicians, despite their undeniable contributions to culture. And let's face it, a raucous toga party would be nothing without a banging soundtrack. Musicians were often lumped in with actors and other performers, occupations that were considered a rung or two above beggars on the social ladder. The Roman elite might have enjoyed the music, but they didn't necessarily respect the people who made it. It's a bit like loving a song on the radio but cringing at the idea of your kid pursuing a career in rock and roll. But why the disdain, you ask? Well, the Romans, ever the pragmatists, valued professions that built the empire. Engineers, architects and soldiers were revered for their tangible contributions. Musicians, on the other hand, were seen as frivolous, their art transient and ephemeral. It was a world where the lasting legacy of a well-paved road or a sturdy aqueduct far outweighed even the most haunting melody. And yet, despite the societal scorn, many musicians clung to their craft with a tenacity that's hard not to admire. They played on, driven by a passion that transcended their meagre earnings and lowly status. Maybe it was the hope of catching the ear of a generous patron, or perhaps it was the simple joy of creating music that kept them going. Whatever the reason, these musicians added to the rich tapestry of Roman life, their notes echoing through the streets long after the applause had faded. In the end, the life of a Roman musician was a constant balancing act between art and survival. It was a struggle for recognition in a world that wanted music without the musician. And while we might romanticize the idea of these ancient performers strumming lyres beneath the Mediterranean sun, the reality was often much cloudier. So, the next time you hear a street musician playing their heart out, spare a thought for their ancient counterparts who faced similar struggles centuries ago. As we prepare to dive deeper into the final act of this historical symphony, remember that music in ancient Rome was a complex dance of power, passion, and perseverance. It was a world where the soundtrack was as varied as the stories of those who created it, each note a testament to the human spirit's resilience. So stay tuned, because in the next part we'll delve into the echoing legacy of Roman music and its timeless influence on the world stage. And so, as we set the stage for the final act of our Roman symphony, it's time to take a step back and survey the legacy these ancient tunes have left behind. A legacy that, despite being wrapped in myth and mystery, continues to resonate through our modern soundscapes. You see, while the Romans might have been tone-deaf to the plight of their musicians, their music was anything but forgettable. Let's start with the instruments themselves. Many of the tools of the Roman musical trade have echoes in today's orchestras. Take the lyre, for example. This harp-like wonder might have been a party favourite in ancient villas, but it's also the ancestor of the modern guitar. It's like the great-great-grandparent who insists on being part of the family band, even if nobody remembers inviting them. The orlos, that fierce sibling of the clarinet and bagpipe, can be seen in today's oboes and bassoons, instruments that have thankfully toned down the orlos's ear-piercing charm. And the cornu? Well, its descendant is none other than the French horn, still capable of waking the dead or at least alarming the neighbours during a practice session. But it's not just the instruments that travel through time. The music itself left an indelible mark. Roman music, with its emphasis on melody and harmony, laid the groundwork for Western music theory. Their scales and modes are the forebears of those used in European classical music. So the next time you find yourself nodding along to Beethoven or tapping your foot to a Mozart symphony, remember that you're vibing to a tradition that the Romans helped set in motion. They were the original trendsetters, even if their toga parties didn't have the best Spotify playlists. The lyrical legacy of Rome is where things get particularly interesting. Roman poets like Virgil and Horace knew how to turn a phrase, crafting verses that were as witty as they were wise. Their works were often set to music, a tradition that influenced the medieval troubadours and, eventually, the songwriters who shaped our modern lyrical landscape. It's the kind of influence that sees echoes in everything from Shakespearean sonnets to Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize-winning lyrics. These ancient wordsmiths knew the power of a well-placed metaphor and a catchy refrain, proving that while the Romans might not have invented the pop hit, they certainly wrote the blueprint. Now, let's talk about the most enduring legacy of Roman music, its fascination. For centuries, the idea of Roman music has captivated historians, musicians, and romantics alike. There's something undeniably alluring about the thought of ancient compositions lost to time, like the forgotten B-sides of history. It's this mystery that fuels everything from scholarly debates to pop culture references. Who hasn't seen a Hollywood epic where the hero struts into battle with a soundtrack that would make any cornu player beam with pride? But what does this enduring fascination teach us? If anything, it's a reminder of the human tendency to romanticize the past. We love a good story, especially when it involves larger-than-life characters like Nero, playing his lyre while Rome goes up in flames. Never mind the historical accuracy. It's a myth that speaks to our love of drama and spectacle, traits the Romans themselves knew all too well. Yet, as much as we glorify the melodies of Rome, it's crucial to remember the musicians who played them. They were the unsung heroes who, despite being undervalued in their time, kept the music alive. Their stories remind us that art has always been a labour of love, often born from struggle and resilience. They might not have had the social standing of a senator or the wealth of a merchant, but their contributions have outlasted the empires they served. And so, as we conclude our journey through the music and lyrics of ancient Rome, we're left with a rich tapestry of sound, woven with notes of power, passion, and politics. It's a symphony that, despite its age, continues to play on, echoing through the halls of history and into our lives today. So the next time you find yourself humming a tune or tapping a rhythm, pause for a moment and tip your hat to the Romans. They might not have invented music, but they certainly knew how to make it memorable. In the end, their legacy is a testament to the timeless nature of music, a universal language that speaks across centuries, connecting us to the past while inspiring the future. And if that's not worth a standing ovation, I don't know what is. Amidst the bustling chaos of 19th century New England, a certain household in Litchfield, Connecticut, stood out not because they were particularly quiet or well-behaved, but because they were exactly the opposite. Meet the Beecher clan, a family of 15, where chaos was a permanent resident. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the seventh of 13 children, grew up in a home that was less Little House on the Prairie and more survival of the loudest. Now, you might think the Beecher home was a quaint place of thoughtful discourse. And sure, they had discourse, all right, over the dinner table, with everyone's elbows flailing as they fought to make a point or just get a piece of pie. Lyman Beecher, Harriet's father, was a fiery preacher with a penchant for saving souls and roasting a good dinner debate. He was a man on a mission to raise his brood into moral crusaders, one heated discussion at a time. The stakes were high. Lyman expected his offspring to make a splash in the world, and not just in the bathwater. Picture this. A household where economic realities were as harsh as winter in New England, but the intellectual climate was as hot as a summer day in the Sahara. The Beecher family wasn't exactly rolling in dough, and no, I'm not talking about the kind you bake. With 13 mouths to feed, every penny was stretched thinner than Lyman's patience when one of his sermons was interrupted by a crying baby or 12. Harriet, surrounded by this cacophony, learned it early that her voice mattered. She had to, or risked being drowned out by the din of her siblings. But it wasn't just about being heard, it was about saying something worth listening to. In a world where women were often seen and not heard, Harriet's upbringing in a family of outspoken thinkers was her first rebellion against societal norms. Let's not sugarcoat it. New England life in the 1800s was as tough as a week-old biscuit. The Beecher family was part of the Protestant work ethic brigade, where hard work wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Harriet didn't have a silver spoon, but she did have a sharp wit, honed at the very same table where her father's sermons were dissected alongside the Sunday roast. In this intellectual hothouse, Harriet developed a keen sense of justice and a nose for the absurdities of life. This was a time when the Industrial Revolution was cranking up and the social fabric was being stretched and re-sewn in ways that seemed both exciting and terrifying. The Beechers, despite their financial woes, were rich in ideas, and those ideas were Harriet's currency in a world where women's thoughts were often undervalued. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this intellectual utopia. The reality was that Harriet, like many women of her time, faced significant hurdles. The Beecher family's economic struggles meant that Harriet and her siblings had to be resourceful. Education was valued, but not always accessible, and the threat of illness loomed large in an era where medical science was still trying to figure out if bleeding patients was a cure or just a really bad idea. In this environment, Harriet's resilience was formed. She learned to navigate the complexities of a society that was rapidly changing, with the emerging middle class and the tensions of pre-Civil War America creating a backdrop that was anything but stable. As she listened to her father's sermons and her siblings' arguments, Harriet absorbed the energy and turned it into a fuel that would later ignite her literary fire. So here's to the Beecher family table, a place where ideas were served with a side of sibling rivalry, and where Harriet Beecher Stowe, amid the clamour, began to find her voice. It was a voice that would eventually echo across the nation, but for now it was just another part of the glorious bedlam that was life in the Beecher household. And so, amid the glorious bedlam of the Beecher household, Harriet Beecher Stowe began to carve out her own narrative. Her early forays into writing were like tentative steps on a tightrope, balancing between the chaos of her family life and the equally tumultuous world outside. Harriet started her writing journey by contributing sketches to local publications, which was the 19th century equivalent of testing the waters on social media before diving into a full-fledged blog. Her work appeared in periodicals like the Western Monthly magazine, where she penned pieces under the pseudonym Christopher Crowfield, a name that sounded more like a character from a Dickens novel than a New England writer. Harriet's early writings were small windows into her ever-expanding world. They were sketches, little stories that captured the everyday absurdities and injustices she observed. These weren't just idle musings, they were Harriet's way of processing the world and her place in it. And let's not forget, she was doing this while navigating the financial stress that dogged her family like a persistent stray dog. At the time, a writer's life was far from lucrative, unless you were Charles Dickens, and even then it was probably touch and go. Harriet's writing gigs brought in just enough to keep things going, kind of like the 19th century version of freelance blogging for coffee money. Now, Harriet wasn't just scribbling in a vacuum. She was part of a literary scene that was as bustling as a New York City subway at rush hour. The Beechers, despite their tight finances, were well connected, and Harriet found herself rubbing elbows with the intellectual elite of her day. It was in this mix of intellectual ferment and economic challenge that Harriet honed her craft, learning to wield her pen with the precision of a surgeon and the tenacity of a marathon runner. But let's talk about the economic context for a second, because money matters, folks. The Beecher family wasn't exactly swimming in cash, and Harriet's husband, Calvin Stowe, a biblical scholar and professor, wasn't bringing in the big bucks either. The Stowes lived in Cincinnati for a time, where Calvin taught at Lane Theological Seminary. The financial reality was that Harriet had to write not just for passion, but for bread and butter, or, more accurately, for flour and lard, since those were definitely on the shopping list. It was during these years that Harriet truly began to understand the power of her voice. She saw slavery firsthand in Cincinnati, a city just across the river from the slave state of Kentucky. This proximity to the brutal realities of slavery fueled her writing and sharpened her sense of purpose. It was also a time of personal upheaval. Harriet and Calvin faced numerous hardships, including the loss of a child. In 1849, their son Samuel Charles died of cholera, a tragedy that deepened her empathy and resolve to address the injustices she saw. And then came Uncle Tom's Cabin. Listen, if you think writing a bestseller is hard today, try doing it with 7 kids underfoot, each one a potential literary critic with sticky fingers and a penchant for chaos. Harriet's writing process was anything but serene. She wrote at a small table in the family parlor, surrounded by the cacophony of domestic life. Inspiration struck in the oddest moments, like when she was elbow-deep in bread dough or chasing after a runaway toddler. It's a wonder she got anything done, but perhaps the chaos was her muse, feeding her creativity like a wildfire. The novel itself was serialized in the National Era, an abolitionist newspaper starting in 1851. It was an instant sensation, a cultural lightning bolt that electrified the nation. By 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin was published as a complete book, selling 300,000 copies in its first year in the United States alone. To put that in perspective, that's like a modern-day author selling 1 million copies almost overnight. The book was a phenomenon, reaching across the Atlantic to sell well in Britain too. But here's where we bust a few myths. Uncle Tom's Cabin wasn't just the work of a solitary genius inspired by divine providence. It was a product of its time, a response to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the national conversation about slavery. Harriet drew on real stories from escaped slaves, abolitionist literature, and her own observations. The novel was as much reportage as it was fiction, a mirror held up to a society that was deeply divided and in desperate need of self-reflection. In the end, Harriet Beecher Stowe's journey into writing was as much about survival as it was about creativity. Every page she wrote was a step toward financial stability and social impact, a balance as precarious as a high-wire act. Her tenacity was born from necessity, her voice sharpened by the need to be heard above the din of both her family and a nation in turmoil. As we pause here, with Harriet's pen still scratching fervently across the page, we see a woman on the cusp of changing the world, one chaotic, inspired sentence at a time. And the story, much like her journey, is far from over. And just like that, with ink-stained fingers and a heart full of righteous indignation, Harriet Beecher Stowe sent Uncle Tom's Cabin out into the world, and boy, did it hit like a thunderclap. Let's dive into the numbers first, because they're juicier than Aunt Jemima's syrup. In its first year alone, the book sold an astonishing 300,000 copies in the United States. To put that into perspective, today, that's like an author dropping a debut novel and landing it on every nightstand and coffee table in America overnight. It was an absolute blockbuster, a term that would have made sense even back then if you imagine the blocks of wood used in printing presses being smashed by the demand. But it wasn't just the raw sales figures that were jaw-dropping. Uncle Tom's Cabin became a cultural phenomenon, sparking debates hotter than a July afternoon in the cotton fields. People couldn't stop talking about it, whether they loved it, hated it, or just wanted to know what all the fuss was about. In the North, the book was embraced by abolitionists like a long-lost sibling finally come to take a stand. It bolstered the movement, giving them a fiery, emotional rallying cry against the horrors of slavery. Harriet didn't just write a book. She threw a Molotov cocktail into the national conversation and watched the sparks fly. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Stowe's incendiary prose. Down in the South, the reception was colder than a New England winter night, and not just because they were worried about an impending frost. Many Southern readers despised the book, seeing it as a gross misrepresentation of the institution they so desperately defended. They claimed it was full of inaccuracies, though quite a few conveniently skipped the part where it was based on real narratives from escaped slaves. Southern critics churned out rebuttals faster than a steam engine, with books like Aunt Phyllis's Cabin attempting to paint a more palatable picture of plantation life. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite have the same impact. And then there was Harriet herself, catapulted to fame faster than you can say abolition. Picture this. A woman who had been juggling writing with household chores and a brood of children suddenly found herself in the spotlight. Her unexpected celebrity status was both a blessing and a burden. Harriet embarked on a book tour that was part literary event, part three-ring circus. She was greeted by throngs of admirers, each eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had dared to speak out. Amidst the adulation, there were moments that would make even a reality TV star blush. At one event, a particularly zealous fan presented Harriet with a gilded snuff box, because nothing says "thank you for your contribution to the abolition of slavery" like a shiny tobacco accessory. But this was the 19th century, where eccentricity was often overlooked in favour of politeness, and Harriet accepted the gift with the grace of someone who had just been handed a golden potato peeler. Beyond the quirks and fanfare, Harriet's newfound fame brought unexpected connections. She met with President Abraham Lincoln in 1862, who reportedly greeted her with the words, "So you are the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." Now, some historians debate the authenticity of this quote. But whether Lincoln actually said it or not, the sentiment captures the seismic impact of her work. Harriet's writing didn't just ignite conversations, it fanned the flames of a national crisis that would eventually erupt into the Civil War. One might think all this would go to Harriet's head, but she remained remarkably grounded. Fame, after all, is a fickle friend, and she was wise enough to know that her real legacy lay not in the adoration of her fans, but in the social change her book was helping to inspire. She continued to advocate for abolition, speaking at rallies and using her voice to champion the cause. Yet, as with any cultural phenomenon, Uncle Tom's Cabin also attracted its fair share of controversy and criticism. Some abolitionists argued that the portrayal of Uncle Tom was too passive, too willing to endure suffering without resistance. The term Uncle Tom would eventually become a pejorative, used to describe someone perceived as overly subservient to white authority, a twist of fate that probably would have left Harriet scratching her head in disbelief. Despite the mixed reactions and the frenetic pace of her post-publication life, Harriet remained steadfast in her mission. Her writing, fueled by personal conviction and informed by the stories of those who had lived through slavery, continued to resonate. Uncle Tom's Cabin was translated into numerous languages, reaching audiences as far-flung as Russia and Japan. In an era long before viral tweets or TikTok videos, Harriet's words crossed oceans and continents, igniting discussions about human rights and freedom in places she would never visit. As we pause here, the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe and her indelible impact on American society is far from over. Her pen remains poised, ready to continue challenging the status quo and advocating for justice in ways that would ripple through history. Stay tuned as we follow Harriet's journey through the tumultuous years that lay ahead, where her tenacity and fortitude would be tested like never before. So, as Harriet Beecher Stowe sat poised to challenge the status quo with her pen, the myths and legends around her began to grow faster than a politician's campaign promises. Let's be real, folks. Her sudden rise to fame was like watching a viral cat video, unexpected, furiously debated, and impossible to ignore. The narrative spun around Stowe, and her work was as complex as the tangled web of societal norms she sought to unravel. First, Let's tackle the myth of the little woman quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. It's a line that has echoed down the annals of history like an overplayed pop song. The story goes that upon meeting Stowe, Lincoln supposedly said, "So you are the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." Now, whether Honest Abe actually uttered these words is about as clear as a politician's tax records. The quote's authenticity is debated, with some historians suggesting it's more legend than fact. But like all good legends, it captures a deeper truth. In this case, the profound impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin on the national psyche. Meanwhile, Stowe was living anything but a fairy tale. Despite the accolades, her life remained a roller coaster of personal and financial challenges. Imagine trying to change the world while managing a household teetering on the brink of financial ruin. Her husband, Calvin, while a supportive partner, wasn't exactly a financial wizard. The Stowe household often juggled debts that threatened to topple them like a poorly constructed Jenga tower. Yet, amidst the chaos, Harriet remained a steadfast advocate for social change. Her pen didn't retire after Uncle Tom's Cabin. Oh no, it was just getting warmed up. She continued to write and publish, her later works exploring a range of social issues. In 1856, she published Dread, A Tale of the Great Dismal Swamp, a novel that delved into the complexities of slave insurrections and the moral quagmire of the American South. Though it didn't achieve the same blockbuster success as Uncle Tom's Cabin, it reinforced her commitment to the abolitionist cause. Let's not forget the economic context here, because the 19th century was no picnic, and we're not talking about the kind with potato salad and checkered blankets. The Panic of 1857 hit like a financial tsunami, affecting families across the nation, including the Stowes. Harriet's income from writing was a lifeline, but the market was fickle, and her earnings fluctuated like a temperamental stock market. Yet, despite these challenges, Stowe's resolve never wavered. Her activism extended beyond the page. Harriet was a vocal supporter of the Union during the Civil War, using her platform to advocate for the abolition of slavery and support for African American soldiers. She penned essays and articles that were as pointed as a bayonet, rallying public opinion and urging action. In 1864, she even toured Europe, sharing her views and experiences with audiences across the continent. It was a time when international travel was as arduous as it was inspiring, and Harriet embraced the opportunity to broaden her impact. Now, let's pause to debunk another myth, the notion that Stowe was merely a passive player in a male-dominated literary world. This narrative is about as accurate as a broken clock. Harriet was no wallflower. She was a literary force to be reckoned with, navigating the publishing industry with a shrewdness that would make a Wall Street banker proud. She negotiated her own contracts, fought for fair compensation, and was unafraid to challenge publishers when they tried to shortchange her. In an era when women were often sidelined, Harriet carved out a space for herself and refused to settle for anything less than what she deserved. But celebrity is a double-edged sword, and Harriet's fame came with its share of detractors. Some critics accused her of exaggerating the evils of slavery, while others dismissed her as a sentimentalist. Yet, in defiance of her critics, Harriet's work continued to resonate, shining a light on the harsh realities of slavery and galvanizing the abolitionist movement. Her writing was a mirror held up to a nation grappling with its conscience, forcing readers to confront the uncomfortable truths that lay beneath the surface. Even as the Civil War raged on, Harriet's commitment to social causes remained unwavering. She supported the Freedmen's Bureau, an organization dedicated to helping newly emancipated slaves transition to freedom. Harriet's activism wasn't just theoretical, it was practical, grounded in the belief that real change required more than words. It demanded action. As the years passed, Harriet's literary output evolved, reflecting her expanding worldview and the changing landscape of post-war America. She wrote about women's rights, temperance, and other social issues, her pen as sharp as ever. Yet, despite her continued success, life was far from easy. Personal hardships, including the deaths of loved ones and ongoing financial struggles, tested her resilience. But Harriet was nothing if not tenacious, and she faced each challenge with the same determination that had carried her through the tumultuous years of the Civil War. In the end, Harriet Beecher Stowe's legacy is a testament to the power of words to inspire change. Her life was a complex tapestry of triumphs and trials, myths and realities, woven together by a commitment to justice that never wavered. As we continue to explore her journey, it's clear that Harriet's story is far from over. Her pen may have been stilled by time, but the echoes of her words continue to resonate, reminding us that the fight for justice is a battle that must be fought with both courage and compassion. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Harriet's life promises to be as compelling as the last. And so, as Harriet Beecher Stowe's literary career continued to unfold, she became a symbol as complex as the times she lived in. Her life, an intricate tapestry woven with threads of triumph and adversity, left a legacy that would be mythologized, scrutinized, and celebrated in equal measure. The story of Harriet Beecher Stowe isn't just one of a woman who penned a book. It's the tale of a cultural force that rippled through the corridors of history, echoing in ways even she could never have imagined. Now, let's take a closer look at her magnum opus, Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book that did more than just line the shelves. It shaped an entire cultural zeitgeist. For starters, its impact on American literature was seismic. Before Stowe, the American novel was like a potluck dinner with lots of enthusiasm but little cohesion. Enter Uncle Tom's Cabin, and suddenly the literary world had a feast of social commentary that was as hard-hitting as it was eloquent. The book challenged writers to think beyond mere entertainment, pushing them to tackle the moral issues of their time with both honesty and urgency. But let's not get too carried away on the wings of sentimentality. The book's portrayal of African-American characters, particularly Uncle Tom himself, has sparked debate hotter than a July barbecue. The character of Uncle Tom became a double-edged sword, lauded for his moral strength, yet criticized for embodying a stereotype of passivity and subservience. This irony was not lost on later generations who found the term Uncle Tom evolving into a pejorative for complacency, a twist that would have likely left Stowe herself both perplexed and pensive. Still, the book's influence extended far beyond the confines of literary criticism. It was a catalyst for the abolitionist movement, giving voice to the voiceless and drawing attention to the brutal realities of slavery. Stowe's narrative, grounded in the testimonies of real individuals who had escaped the shackles of bondage, was a clarion call for justice. It made the abstract suffering of millions a visceral reality for readers, turning the horrors of slavery into a shared experience that could no longer be ignored. Economically, the book was a juggernaut. With sales figures soaring past the 300,000 mark in its first year, Uncle Tom's Cabin was a commercial success that transformed Stowe's financial landscape from precarious to prosperous. But let's not pretend this was a simple rags-to-riches tale. Even with her newfound fortune, the Stowe family still faced financial hurdles that would make a tightrope walker break out in a cold sweat. Nevertheless, the book's success gave Harriet the means to continue her advocacy, funding other abolitionist endeavors and supporting causes close to her heart. And then there was the international impact. Uncle Tom's Cabin was translated into over 60 languages, spreading its message like wildfire across the globe. In Russia, where censorship was as heavy-handed as a sledgehammer, the book was smuggled in and distributed clandestinely, fueling discussions about serfdom and reform. In England, it influenced public opinion to such an extent that it bolstered the anti-slavery movement, a testament to the power of words to cross borders and shatter chains. Yet, as with any tale that achieves legendary status, the line between fact and fiction often blurs. Stowe's life and work have been romanticized, her struggles glossed over in favor of a more palatable narrative. The reality was far from a storybook ending. Harriet faced criticism not only from pro-slavery factions, but also from within the abolitionist movement itself. Some argued that her portrayal of slavery was too sentimental, too focused on the morality of individual characters rather than the systemic brutality of the institution. Despite these critiques, Harriet's tenacity in the face of adversity remains an inspiring chapter in the annals of history. Her ability to wield the pen as a weapon of social change set a precedent for future generations of writers and activists. Figures like James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, and Maya Angelou would pick up the torch, using literature as a means to challenge societal norms and advocate for justice. Stowe's legacy is a reminder that the written word is a powerful tool for change, capable of reaching hearts and minds in ways that defy time and distance. In examining Stowe's life, we're reminded that history is not a static tableau, but a dynamic narrative shaped by those brave enough to challenge the status quo. Harriet Beecher Stowe was one such figure, a woman whose voice transcended the confines of her era to influence the course of history. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience, the impact of empathy, and the enduring importance of speaking truth to power. As we wrap up this journey through the life and legacy of Harriet Beecher Stowe, it's clear that her contributions to American culture and literature are as profound as they are complex. Her work, fueled by a deep-seated conviction in the possibility of a just society, continues to resonate with those who strive to make the world a better place. In the end, Harriet Beecher Stowe's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of human empathy, the transformative potential of storytelling, and the unyielding tenacity of the human spirit. So, as the echoes of her words continue to reverberate through the halls of history, we find ourselves inspired by the indomitable spirit of a woman who dared to write for change. Harriet's legacy is more than just ink on paper. It's a living testament to the fact that, when armed with conviction and courage, a single voice can indeed change the world. In a world teetering on the edge of chaos, where history seemed to have an unfortunate habit of repeating itself, Henry Kissinger was born on May 27, 1923, in the quiet Bavarian town of Fürth, Germany. Now, if you're thinking small-town boy makes big in the grand scheme of 20th century geopolitics, you're not entirely wrong. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before he was the diplomat whose every move was scrutinized by rivals and allies alike, young Heinz Alfred Kissinger was just a kid with a knack for chess and a front-row seat to the unfolding nightmare that was Nazi Germany. The Kissingers were a Jewish family, and like thousands of others, they found themselves caught in the crossfire of an increasingly hostile regime. By 1938, the writing was on the wall, or more accurately, all over the newspapers, speeches, and discriminatory laws of the time. It was time to pack up the chessboard and get out of Dodge. The Kissingers made their way to the United States, specifically to the bustling, diverse streets of New York City, seeking refuge and new beginnings. At this moment, the entire world seemed to be throwing itself headlong into madness. But for young Henry, it was the start of something entirely different, a journey that would take him from the Bronx to the halls of power. Now, if you've ever wondered what makes someone like Kissinger tick, you might start by looking at his education. After all, he didn't just stumble into a career of navigating international minefields. By 1943, Kissinger was drafted into the U.S. Army, which probably felt a bit like going from the frying pan into the fire. But this was also where he honed his analytical skills, serving in the Military Intelligence Division. It turns out that parsing enemy communications and strategy was great training for a future in diplomacy. After the war, Kissinger returned to the academic world with a vengeance. He scored a place at Harvard, one of those universities that does not exactly roll out the welcome mat for just anyone. Here, he put his nose to the grindstone and emerged with a PhD in 1954. But let's not get too bogged down in degrees and academic accolades. Though they were impressive, what really set Kissinger apart was his realist approach to diplomacy. A bit of a cynic, he was not one to get swept up in utopian dreams. Instead, he believed in dealing with the world as it was, not as we wished it to be. This was not the stuff of feel-good Hollywood narratives, but it was practical. By the time Kissinger was carving out his niche as a scholar, the world had taken on a distinctly Cold War chill. The ideological clash between capitalism and communism was more than just a global chess match. It was a high-stakes game where nuclear annihilation was always lurking in the background. The United States needed sharp minds to navigate these treacherous waters, and Kissinger's star was rising at just the right time. Let's pause here for a moment and appreciate the sheer absurdity of the post-war American landscape. It was a time of rock and roll and red scares of Eisenhower and Elvis. The country was in the throes of a cultural and political transformation, and Kissinger was right in the thick of it. He might not have been jibing to the latest hits on the radio, but he was certainly attuned to the seismic shifts in global power. Kissinger's realist approach was not just academic musing, it had real-world implications. During his time at Harvard, he was involved in something called the Council on Foreign Relations, where he penned Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy, a work that was less bedtime reading and more a guide to not blowing ourselves up. In it, Kissinger argued for flexible response strategies rather than the all-or-nothing approach that had been the norm. It was a radical idea at the time, proposing that diplomacy might involve something other than saber-rattling. As the 1950s bled into the 1960s, Kissinger's career was gaining momentum. He was becoming a go-to guy for all things related to international relations. Now, let's be clear, he wasn't some kind of diplomatic superhero. He wasn't leaping tall buildings or single-handedly saving the world. But what he did have was a talent for seeing the bigger picture, for understanding that diplomacy was as much about managing relationships as it was about managing crises. The political climate was nothing if not turbulent. This was a period marked by both fear and hope, by the spectre of nuclear war and the promise of technological and social progress. Kissinger's realist philosophy fit neatly into this paradoxical world. He was pragmatic, sometimes frustratingly so, to those who preferred idealistic visions of international harmony. But Kissinger's approach was grounded in a sober assessment of power dynamics and national interests. And so, as the curtain rose on the next chapter of his life, Kissinger was ready to step onto the world stage. He wasn't the type to be swayed by the romantic allure of diplomatic grandeur. No, his was a mind focused on the nuts and bolts of policy, the nitty-gritty details that would one day shape events on a global scale. But that's a story for another time. For now, we leave him on the cusp of a career that would see him become one of the most influential and controversial figures in modern history. A man who, whether you loved or loathed him, knew how to play the game like few others. And so we find Henry Kissinger, poised at the edge of history's stage, ready to step into the blinding spotlight of American foreign policy. Enter Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, a man whose paranoia was matched only by his penchant for secretive back channels and grand geopolitical strategies. Nixon needed a foreign policy mastermind, someone who could navigate the murky waters of Cold War diplomacy without getting swept away by its undercurrents. Enter Kissinger, with his no-nonsense realist approach, a match made in, well, not heaven, but perhaps in the shadowy corridors of power. Now, the world of Nixon's Washington was nothing if not Byzantine. You had a president with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Watergate complex and an administration that thrived on political intrigue. This was a place where trust was as scarce as a snowstorm in July, and Kissinger fit right in. He was appointed as National Security Advisor in 1969, a position that put him smack dab in the middle of the White House's foreign policy machine. And boy did he get to work. First on the agenda, Vietnam. By the late 1960s, the Vietnam War was like a bad movie that refused to end. The US had been involved for years, pouring in money and manpower, only to find itself bogged down in a quagmire that was as much about ideology as it was about territory. It was a conflict that had already cost the United States over $120 billion and claimed the lives of more than 58,000 American soldiers. The American public was growing restless, and so was Nixon. He wanted a way out, but not one that looked like a defeat. Enter Kissinger, who was tasked with finding an exit strategy that would save face while achieving peace with honor, whatever that meant. Kissinger's approach to the Vietnam War was both cunning and controversial. He believed in using diplomacy as a tool of power, wielding it with the precision of a chess master. He opened secret negotiations with North Vietnam in Paris, meetings that were as clandestine as a spy novel and twice as dramatic. These talks eventually led to the Paris Peace Accords in January 1973, a document that was supposed to bring about a ceasefire and end the direct US military involvement in Vietnam. In theory, it was a triumph of diplomacy. In reality, it was a band-aid on a bullet wound. The war raged on between the North and South Vietnamese, a grim reminder that peace on paper doesn't always translate to peace on the ground. But here's where history takes one of its infamous ironic twists. For his efforts in negotiating the Accords, Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973. Yes, you heard that right. The man who had played a significant role in prolonging the war was now being lauded as a champion of peace. To say that the decision was controversial would be like saying the Vietnam War was a minor skirmish. Even Kissinger himself wasn't entirely comfortable with the accolade, reportedly offering to return the prize if the ceasefire failed. Spoiler alert, it did. Despite the chaos in Vietnam, Kissinger's tenure wasn't all doom and gloom. He was also instrumental in orchestrating the opening of diplomatic relations with China, a move that redefined the global balance of power. In 1972, he made a secret trip to Beijing, laying the groundwork for Nixon's historic visit later that year. This was a big deal, folks. China and the US had been like two heavyweight boxers circling each other in the ring, neither willing to throw the first punch. Kissinger's diplomacy helped thaw decades of frosty relations and opened China up to the world, a move that has had lasting impacts on global economics and politics. Kissinger's strategies were not without their critics. His realpolitik approach, prioritizing national interest and power over ideological purity, meant making some morally questionable decisions. He backed authoritarian regimes in countries like Chile and Argentina, arguing that the threat of communism justified supporting unsavory characters. It was a classic case of the ends justifying the means, a philosophy that earned Kissinger both praise and scorn. As Kissinger's influence grew, so did the mythos surrounding him. He was painted as a master manipulator, a puppet master pulling the strings of international affairs. Some called him a diplomatic genius, others a Machiavellian schemer. The truth, as always, was likely somewhere in between. He was a man who understood the complexities of the global stage, who knew that diplomacy was a game of strategy, not sentiment. But his legacy was, and still is, a contentious one. For every admirer who praised his strategic brilliance, there was a critic ready to decry his moral ambiguity. By the time Nixon's presidency came crashing down in the wake of the Watergate scandal, Kissinger had already left an indelible mark on U.S. foreign policy. He had served as Secretary of State from 1973, navigating the turbulent waters of international relations with his characteristic blend of pragmatism and cunning. The world had changed dramatically during his tenure, with new alliances forged and old ones tested. Whether you saw him as a hero or a villain, there was no denying his impact. Kissinger's time in the Nixon administration was a whirlwind of diplomacy, controversy, and historical significance. He had risen from an immigrant kid in New York City to one of the most powerful men in the world, a journey marked by both triumph and turmoil. As the 1970s rolled on, Kissinger continued to play a pivotal role on the world stage, shaping the policies that would influence generations to come. But the tale of Henry Kissinger is far from over. There's more intrigue, more diplomacy, and yes, more controversy awaiting in the chapters to come. So stay tuned, because the story of this geopolitical chess master is still unfolding, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Yet, as we continue the tale of Henry Kissinger and his diplomatic escapades, the scene shifts from the jungles of Vietnam to the bustling, enigmatic streets of Beijing. Now, if you thought Kissinger's secret talks with North Vietnam were a cloak-and-dagger affair, his diplomatic dance with China was a masterclass in secrecy. Picture the Cold War's chessboard, the US, and the Soviet Union were locked in an intense stare-down, each waiting for the other to blink. Enter China, a wild card that could tip the balance in favor of either player. In the early 1970s, China was like that mysterious neighbor who never comes to the block party and everyone speculates about. American public opinion, fueled by decades of McCarthy-era propaganda, saw China as a distant, inscrutable power, a bamboo curtain of isolation and communism. But Richard Nixon, always the strategic poker player, saw an opportunity. And who better to deliver a royal flush than his ace diplomat, Henry Kissinger? In July 1971, Kissinger embarked on a journey that was as shrouded in mystery as a John le Carré novel. Officially, he was on a tour of Southeast Asia and Pakistan. Unofficially, he was slipping away to China, under the cover of a sick day in Pakistan. Yep, the man called in sick to the world's biggest diplomatic meeting. It's the kind of excuse that would make Ferris Bueller proud. Kissinger's secret meetings with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai were the stuff of diplomatic legend. Over a series of days, in a country that was essentially a geopolitical black hole to the west, Kissinger and Zhou hammered out the details of a new relationship. The stakes were sky-high. Opening relations with China had the potential to redefine global alliances and, let's be honest, leave the Soviets sweating like they'd just run a marathon in a fur coat. The motivations for this diplomatic overture were as complex as the Great Wall itself. For the US, cozying up to China was a strategic play to counterbalance Soviet power. A little divide-and-conquer game, if you will. For China, Emerging from the shadow of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, it was a chance to break out of isolation and gain international legitimacy. Both nations saw an opportunity to exploit mutual interests while keeping an eye on their respective adversaries. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't simply two old chums catching up over dim sum. The US and China had been ideological foes for decades. Memories of the Korean War were fresh, and Mao's China had been portrayed as a monolithic menace. Kissinger had to navigate a minefield of mistrust while selling the idea of rapprochement to a skeptical American public. The announcement of Nixon's visit to China in February 1972 was nothing short of a diplomatic thunderbolt. The media, always hungry for a headline, dubbed it the week that changed the world. And they weren't entirely wrong. The visit was a media spectacle, a geopolitical circus with Nixon as the ringmaster. The image of the American president shaking hands with Mao, two leaders who couldn't have been more different, was splashed across newspapers globally. It was a public relations coup that painted Nixon as a peacemaker, a role he was all too eager to embrace amid the domestic turmoil of Vietnam and Watergate. Yet, while the cameras captured smiles and handshakes, the real work happened behind closed doors. The Shanghai Communiqué, the diplomatic equivalent of a first date, outlined the framework for future US-China relations. It acknowledged, in a rather diplomatic dance of words, the complex issues surrounding Taiwan, setting the stage for a one China policy that still reverberates in international relations today. But let's not kid ourselves. This was more than diplomatic niceties. The communiqué was a signal to the Soviet Union, the US and China were opening a new chapter, and Moscow wasn't invited to the book club. Economically, the opening to China was like discovering a hidden treasure chest. For the US, it was a chance to tap into a vast, untapped market. In 1972, China was largely agrarian, its economy a sleeping giant. The promise of trade with 1 billion potential consumers was a tantalizing prospect. Meanwhile, China, eager to modernize and industrialize, saw access to Western technology and investment as a golden ticket to economic revival. The geopolitical implications were equally significant. By drawing China closer, the US effectively put the Soviet Union on notice. It was a classic game of leverage. Keep your friends close, but your frenemies closer. But let's not romanticize this diplomatic dalliance. The US-China relationship was fraught with contradictions. America, often self-styled as a beacon of democracy, was now courting a communist regime notorious for its human rights abuses. The media, ever the opportunistic raconteur, painted this as a triumph of diplomacy over ideology. Yet, beneath the carefully choreographed photo ops lay a stark reality. This was realpolitik at its finest, a marriage of convenience rather than conviction. Kissinger, ever the pragmatist, understood the nuances of this new relationship. He knew that diplomacy was a long game, a strategic dance that required finesse and foresight. His orchestration of the China opening was a testament to his skill as a diplomat, a testament that his critics and admirers alike had to acknowledge. Yet the mythos surrounding the Nixon goes to China moment often glosses over the gritty details, the closed-door negotiations, the balancing act of public perception against political reality. In the grand tapestry of Cold War politics, Kissinger's role in opening China was a bold stroke, one that reshaped the global order and left an indelible mark on history. But as with any tale of intrigue and ambition, the story is far from over. There are more plots to unravel, more twists to come, as we continue to explore the life and legacy of Henry Kissinger. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the labyrinth of geopolitics, where nothing is ever as simple as it seems, and the next move could change everything. As the echoes of Kissinger's diplomatic pirouette with China reverberated around the globe, the spotlight shifted to a region where the stakes were equally high and the tensions as combustible as ever, the Middle East. Now, in 1973, the Middle East wasn't exactly a bastion of tranquility. It was more like a geopolitical powder keg, with Israel and its Arab neighbors eyeing each other across borders that were more armistice lines than permanent boundaries. Enter Henry Kissinger, the man with a suitcase perpetually packed and a knack for turning complex international crises into opportunities for diplomatic theatre. The Yom Kippur War, which erupted on October 6, 1973, was a conflict with the dramatic timing of a Shakespearean play kicking off on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel, attempting to reclaim territories lost during the Six-Day War in 1967. This wasn't just a military clash, it was a seismic event with global repercussions. The superpowers were watching closely, and the world held its breath. The war was like a high-stakes poker game where everyone had a hand, but only a few knew the rules. Kissinger, by now the US Secretary of State, was thrust into the role of crisis manager, with his shuttle diplomacy taking center stage. Picture the scene, a Boeing 707, frequently referred to as Air Kissinger, crisscrossing the skies as he bounced between capitals like a ping-pong ball with a PhD. His mission? To broker a ceasefire and prevent the superpowers from stepping in and turning a regional conflict into a global catastrophe. Shuttle diplomacy is a bit like being a middle school guidance counselor, except instead of resolving lunchroom disputes, you're trying to stop countries from blowing each other to bits. Kissinger's task was to mediate between Israel, Egypt, and Syria, navigating a labyrinth of mistrust, historical grievances, and strategic interests. It was a delicate dance, one that required the finesse of Fred Astaire and the patience of a saint. But let's not pretend this was all smooth sailing. Kissinger faced a myriad of challenges, not least of which was the sheer logistical nightmare of coordinating talks across multiple nations, each with its own agenda and red lines. He had to manage the expectations of Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, and Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, all of whom were as stubborn as they were strategic. The negotiations were a mix of high drama and low comedy, with Kissinger often resorting to humour to diffuse tense moments. At one point, when asked about the progress of talks, Kissinger quipped, "The negotiations are like a Rubik's Cube, frustrating, colourful, and almost impossible to solve." Despite the chaos, Kissinger's efforts bore fruit. On October 22nd, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 338, calling for an immediate ceasefire, thanks in no small part to Kissinger's relentless diplomacy. Yet, the ink was barely dry before the fighting resumed, underscoring the fragile nature of peace agreements in a region where trust was scarcer than rain in the Sahara. Economically, the war had far-reaching consequences. The Arab states, frustrated with Western support for Israel, imposed an oil embargo, sending shockwaves through global markets. Oil prices quadrupled virtually overnight, from $3 to $12 a barrel, plunging the world into an energy crisis that sent inflation soaring and economies reeling. For everyday folks, it was a wake-up call. The next time you're stuck in a line at the gas station, you can thank the geopolitical chess matches of the 1970s. Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy eventually led to the signing of the Sinai Interim Agreement in 1975 between Israel and Egypt, marking a step toward peace, albeit a tentative one. It was a moment that illustrated the power of diplomacy, but also its limitations. The agreements were more like temporary band-aids on a festering wound, highlighting the complexities of achieving lasting peace in a region fraught with historical animosities and political rivalries. The long-term impact of Kissinger's Middle East diplomacy is a mixed bag. On one hand, his efforts helped lay the groundwork for the Camp David Accords in 1978, where Egypt and Israel would finally sign a formal peace treaty. On the other hand, the broader Arab-Israeli conflict remains unresolved, with cycles of violence and negotiation continuing to this day. Kissinger's legacy in the Middle East is one of cautious optimism, tempered by harsh realities. A testament to the fact that in international diplomacy, victories are rarely absolute, and compromises often come at a cost. Behind the scenes, Kissinger's approach was both admired and criticized. Advocates hailed him as a master strategist who understood the intricacies of power politics. Critics, however, argued that his methods were too transactional, focusing on short-term gains rather than long-term stability. His realpolitik style, with its emphasis on balance of power, left some wondering whether peace was truly the objective or merely a means to maintain American influence in the region. And let's not forget the human element, the sheer exhaustion of constant travel and negotiation. Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy saw him logging thousands of miles, with jet lag becoming as familiar as an old friend. Yet, even in the midst of fatigue, his wit remained intact. During one particularly grueling trip, when asked about his energy levels, Kissinger reportedly remarked, I've grown so accustomed to jet lag that I now consider it my natural state. As the dust settled on the Yom Kippur War and its diplomatic aftermath, Kissinger emerged with his reputation as a formidable negotiator intact, though not without its share of controversy. His balancing act in the Middle East was a testament to the complexities of international diplomacy, where every handshake was a calculated move and every agreement a potential flashpoint. So, what does Kissinger's Middle East diplomacy teach us? Perhaps it's that in the world of geopolitics, the line between hero and villain is often as thin as a diplomatic communiqué. Kissinger was a figure who thrived in the grey areas, adept at navigating the murky waters of international relations. His legacy is a reminder that diplomacy is as much an art as it is a science, a delicate dance of compromise, calculation, and occasional comedy. As we prepare to delve further into the labyrinthine world of Kissinger's diplomacy, remember this: the Middle East was but one chapter in a career filled with intrigue, ambition, and no shortage of surprises. The story of Henry Kissinger is far from over, and there are more twists and turns to explore in the saga of this enigmatic statesman. So, stay tuned, because the best, or perhaps the most controversial, is yet to come. And so, as we unravel the final threads of Henry Kissinger's diplomatic tapestry, we're left to ponder the enigma of his enduring legacy, a legacy that remains as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. Kissinger's career is a bit like a high-stakes poker game, where every hand dealt had the potential to change the course of history. But were his strategies truly as artful as the myth suggests? Or did they merely exploit the cold calculus of power? Kissinger's influence on modern diplomacy is undeniable. He was the ultimate realist, a maestro of realpolitik who played the global chessboard with the precision of Bobby Fischer on a good day. His approach to foreign policy was grounded in a sober assessment of national interests and power dynamics, a philosophy that continues to resonate in the corridors of power today. Whether you're debating the merits of a nuclear deal with Iran or navigating the intricacies of US-China relations, chances are you're drawing from the Kissinger playbook, whether you know it or not. Yet, the myth of Kissinger as the master diplomat often glosses over the harsher realities of his tenure. His doctrine of balance of power might sound like a noble endeavour to keep the world from imploding, but it also meant making some deeply controversial choices. The man was a pragmatist to his core, unafraid to cozy up to unsavoury regimes if it served the greater geopolitical game. His support for authoritarian regimes in Chile and Argentina, under the guise of staving off communism, remains a dark chapter in his legacy. It's a stark reminder that the art of diplomacy can sometimes be as much about moral compromise as it is about strategic genius. Kissinger's penchant for secrecy and back-channel negotiations added to the mystique of his artful diplomacy, but it also fueled criticism. His secretive nature wasn't just a quirk, it was a calculated strategy to maneuver around bureaucratic red tape and public scrutiny. While this approach yielded significant breakthroughs like the opening to China, it also left a trail of ambiguity and mistrust. Was Kissinger a puppet master pulling the strings of international politics, or simply a man trying to make the best of a bad situation? The answer, as with most things Kissinger, is as clear as mud. Economically, Kissinger's strategies were as impactful as they were controversial. His détente with the Soviet Union and opening to China not only altered the balance of power, but also had far-reaching economic implications. By easing Cold War tensions, Kissinger helped create a more stable environment for international trade and investment. His efforts laid the groundwork for the eventual globalization of the economy, a shift that has lifted millions out of poverty but also exacerbated inequalities, a consequence that could have easily filled the footnotes of his policy memos. The myth versus reality of Kissinger's diplomacy is a tale as old as time, the classic clash between romanticized legend and gritty truth. Kissinger was no wizard with a wand, conjuring miracles out of thin air. He was a man who understood that diplomacy was often about choosing the lesser of two evils. His negotiations were as much about concessions as they were about victories, a dance of give and take that required the patience of a saint and the cunning of a fox. So, what lessons can contemporary statesmen draw from Kissinger's career? Perhaps the most salient is that diplomacy is rarely black and white. It's a world painted in shades of grey, where moral clarity is often a luxury rather than a given. Kissinger's legacy teaches us that the art of diplomacy is as much about managing expectations as it is about managing crises. It's about understanding the limits of power and the importance of timing, a lesson that resonates in today's fast-paced, hyper-connected world. And then there's the human element. Kissinger's career was defined by his ability to connect with world leaders, to read the room, and adjust his strategy accordingly. It's a reminder that behind the grand strategies and political machinations, diplomacy is ultimately a human endeavour, one that requires empathy, intuition, and a healthy dose of humour. As Kissinger himself once remarked, diplomacy is the art of restraining power, a quote that encapsulates the delicate balance between force and finesse that defines the profession. As we conclude this exploration of Henry Kissinger's life and legacy, we're left with a portrait of a man who was as enigmatic as he was influential. He was a diplomat who thrived in the grey areas, a strategist who understood the complexities of power like few others. Whether you view him as a hero or a villain, there's no denying that Kissinger's impact on the world stage was profound and lasting. His legacy is a testament to the power of diplomacy, with all its flaws and triumphs, its myths and realities. In the end, the story of Henry Kissinger is a reminder that history is rarely simple or straightforward. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, compromise, and the relentless pursuit of power. As we look to the future, we can only hope that the lessons of the past guide us toward a more stable and peaceful world. One where the art of diplomacy continues to evolve, shaped by the legacies of those who dared to dream, and those who dared to act. In the words of Kissinger, the absence of alternatives clears the mind marvellously, a fitting epitaph for a man whose career was defined by navigating the labyrinth of geopolitics, one calculated move at a time. The sun's barely peeking over the Paris skyline as you roll out of your straw-stuffed bed, and the city is already alive with the sound of clattering wheels and the cawing of market hawkers. Welcome to your life as a baker in the 13th century, where the city smells of wet cobblestones, fresh horse manure, and, hopefully, soon, your baked creations. Let's not kid ourselves. Your day kicks off with a whiff of chaos. You've got bread to make, and that means ingredients to gather, because the flour fairy didn't restock your pantry overnight. Your first stop is the flour merchant, conveniently located only a stone's throw from your humble abode. The journey takes you past Notre Dame Cathedral, still a skeletal marvel of scaffolding and stone. Imagine this, it's been under construction since 1163 and won't be finished until 1345, which, in medieval terms, is practically a speed run. Take a moment to appreciate those stonemasons hard at work, considering their careers might span the entire construction. These cathedral builders are the rock stars of your era, minus the groupies, but with plenty of back-breaking labour. As you walk, the city unfolds in a cacophony of sounds and smells. The Seine weaves through like a busy artery, transporting everything from timber to gossip. The market stalls are already bustling, each vendor calling out their wares with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for a wine-soaked tavern night. You weave your way through, dodging a goat that seems suspiciously determined to headbutt your shins. The guild system rules Paris with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. You, as a baker, are part of the mighty corporation of bakers. It's a club, but not the fun kind with secret handshakes and feasts. This is the medieval version of a trade union, ensuring quality control, fair prices, and keeping a watchful eye on anyone daring to sell substandard bread. This means your bread must be up to snuff, or else you'll face fines or worse, the wrath of your fellow bakers. You can thank King Philip II for this organised chaos. He loved a good rule-book almost as much as his quest to expand the kingdom. Now, let's talk dough. Literally. A loaf of bread costs you about a denier or two, depending on the whims of crop yields and weather tantrums. It's the staple of everyone's diet, the medieval version of avocado toast, but without the hipster connotations. Bread is life, literally, and sometimes it's the cause of death too. Cue the ominous music of bread riots. You see, when the price of grain spikes due to a bad harvest, the city's poor don't just grumble, they riot. This is the medieval Yelp review system with far more pitchforks and less Wi-Fi. You finally make it to the flour merchant, Jean the Grumpy, as you affectionately call him. He's a fixture here, as reliable as the rising sun and as cheerful as a tax collector. He hands over a sack of flour, grumbling about the price of grain like a one-man Greek chorus. The cost might make you wince, but it's all part of the game. Parisian bakers are bound by both law and custom to make sure no one starves, which is noble but can leave your pocket feeling emptier than a monk's wine cellar during Lent. With flour in tow, you head to the yeast merchant. Yeast is the magic ingredient, turning flour and water into something far more valuable, bread that doesn't resemble a brick. The yeast trader, Matilda, is the opposite of Jean, full of life and gossip. Today's tale involves a certain noble caught in a scandalous rendezvous which you file away for tavern talk later. Her yeast is top-notch, and you'd cross the entire city to buy from her, but thankfully she's just around the corner. As you make your way back, the streets of Paris reveal their character. This city is a bustling hub of trade and intellect, a place where scholars rub elbows with merchants and everyone has an opinion on everything. The Sorbonne, the new kid on the block as universities go, is already a beacon of learning, drawing students like moths to a particularly wordy flame. Paris is the place to be, if you don't mind the occasional invasion or the perpetual mud. Back in your bakery, it's time to get to work. You've got an oven to fire up, which is no small task. Medieval ovens are not the sleek stainless steel gadgets of today. They're cavernous beasts requiring wood and patience. You stoke the fire, watching as the flames dance like a too enthusiastic minstrel, warming the stone interior to the perfect temperature. The scent of burning wood mixes with the flour dust in the air, creating an aroma that feels like home. As the oven heats, you mix your ingredients. Water, flour, yeast. Each in its precise proportion, a recipe passed down from baker to baker, a chain stretching backward through time. You knead the dough with practiced hands, feeling the texture change from sticky to smooth. It's a tactile meditation, connecting you to generations of bakers who've stood in this very spot, performing this very ritual. Your dough is ready, and you shape it into loaves. Each one is scored with a mark unique to your bakery, a signature that tells Parisians where to find the best bread in the city. It's your brand, long before marketing departments and influencers. These loaves will rise, golden and crusty, filling the bakery with a smell that could tempt even the most devout monk out of fasting. As you slide the loaves into the oven, you take a moment to listen to the city outside. Paris is alive, a living organism, and you are one of its vital cells. You're just a baker, sure, but in this world, bread is power. It fuels the builders of Notre Dame, the scholars of the Sorbonne, the merchants and the nobles. It's the glue that holds this sprawling city together. And so, with the loaves baking, your day truly begins. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, Paris hums with life, and you, the humble baker, are at the heart of it all. And so you find yourself inside the heart of your bakery, where the romance of warm bread is quickly kneaded into the reality of sweat and sore muscles. The romantic image of a baker in a sunlit room, gently dusting flour over a table, is about as accurate as a medieval map of the world. In truth, it's more like an endurance sport, without the cheering crowds or shiny medals. You see, the medieval bakery is a place of magic and mystery, sure, but it's also a place of grueling labour. Take the wood-fired oven, for instance. It's a magnificent beast, but it demands constant feeding. Unlike modern ovens that hum quietly with the push of a button, your oven is a hungry, fiery dragon. It needs wood, lots of it, to reach the right temperature, and that means chopping, stacking, and hauling, often before the sun has even bothered to make an appearance. Forget gym memberships. A medieval baker's workout is all about lugging logs and stoking fires. The process of baking bread back then is a time-consuming alchemy. Let's talk sourdough, the crown jewel of bread making. This isn't your run-of-the-mill bread. Sourdough is a living organism, a bubbling, fermenting concoction of flour and water that captures wild yeast from the air. And while today it's a hipster icon, back then it was just the best method they had. It required a careful balance of time and temperature and the patience of a monk. This isn't a quick rise and bake. A loaf could take days from start to finish, with each step demanding your full attention. Kneading the dough is another story altogether. If you've ever tried mixing a big batch of dough by hand, you know it's not for the faint of heart. Medieval bakers had forearms like blacksmiths, honed by hours of pushing and pulling dough until it was just right. Without the convenience of electric mixers, it was all about elbow grease and sheer determination. Each loaf is a testament to your strength and endurance, a far cry from today's bread machines that do the heavy lifting for you. And let's not forget those early mornings. The romantic notion of a baker as a gentle artist, rising with the sun to create culinary masterpieces, overlooks the stark reality. You're up before the rooster has even thought about crowing. You're stumbling out of bed in the dark, navigating by candlelight, and reaching for the day's first task before most of Paris has even begun to dream. It's not just dedication, it's a necessity. The bread has to be ready for the city's breakfast tables, and that means you start long before anyone else. The romanticized version of a baker's life often ignores the economic pressures that weigh as heavily as a sack of flour. Bread is the staple of Parisian life, and as a baker, you're smack dab in the middle of that supply chain. The price of grain can fluctuate with the unpredictability of the weather, and when it spikes, it feels like the entire city is breathing down your neck. Your livelihood is tied to forces far beyond your control, from droughts to royal decrees. It's a delicate balance, this dance between supply and demand, and it can make or break you. Yet despite the harsh realities, there's a certain allure to it all. There's a rhythm to the work, a connection to the past, and a sense of purpose that comes from feeding a city. Your loaves are more than just food. They're the fuel for Paris, nourishing everyone from the stonemasons at Notre Dame to the scholars at the Sorbonne. You might not have the fame of a troubadour or the wealth of a merchant, but you have something just as important: respect and trust. People rely on you to fill their tables and their bellies, and that's a kind of power too. Even as you grumble about the aches in your back and the soot on your hands, there's a part of you that wouldn't trade it for anything. You're part of the lifeblood of Paris, an essential thread in the city's tapestry. The fire in your oven isn't just a tool, it's a symbol of your craft and your dedication. Every loaf that emerges from that inferno is a testament to your skill and your hard work. So, as the sun finally rises and Paris begins to stir, you take a moment to breathe it all in. The scent of fresh bread mingles with the morning air, and for a brief moment the world feels just right. The city outside your door is waking up, ready to greet the day, and you've already played your part in setting it all in motion. You're not just a baker, you're a vital cog in the grand machine of medieval life. But don't get too comfortable. There's still plenty of work to be done, and the day is just getting started. As the loaves cool on the shelves and the city hums to life outside, you prepare for the next round of challenges. After all, the life of a medieval baker is nothing if not a constant cycle of effort and reward, with just enough magic sprinkled in to keep you coming back for more. As the aroma of freshly baked bread wafts through your bakery, the sun now fully awake, the city of Paris stirs to life, and so do your customers. Imagine a line forming at your door, a motley crew of medieval society, each with their own story and purpose. It's time to meet the people who make your grueling work worthwhile, or at least tolerable. First in line is a peasant, a regular face you've come to know over the years. His clothes are patched, his hands calloused, and he's got a smile that says he's seen more than his fair share of hard times. For him, bread isn't just food, it's the cornerstone of his diet. In a world where meat is a luxury and vegetables are seasonal, bread is the dependable filler. It's the fast food of the medieval era, minus the drive-through and questionable nutritional value. Yet, it provides the calories needed to labor in the fields from dawn till dusk. You hand over a coarse, hearty loaf, known as pain de métal, something that could probably double as a weapon if needed. It's not fancy, but it's sustenance, and it's priced to fit even the tightest of budgets. Next up is a merchant, a stark contrast to the peasant in every possible way. He's dressed in finer fabrics, his hands soft, probably more accustomed to counting coins than swinging a scythe. For him, bread is a symbol of social standing. He's after the white bread, pain de blanc, a delicacy that screams affluence because it's made from the finest, whitest flour. It's not just a staple, it's an emblem of success, a way to show that he can afford to eat what others can't. You hand over the loaf, knowing it's the bread equivalent of a status update on medieval social media. Then there's the clergy, a priest from the nearby Notre Dame, still draped in scaffolding and the prayers of hopeful builders. Bread has a dual role in his world. It's both a basic necessity and a sacred symbol. In the Eucharist, it transforms into the body of Christ, a miracle of faith and flour. For him, bread is a reminder of his spiritual duties and a connection to a tradition far older than the city itself. You offer a loaf with the customary sign of the cross scored into it, an indication that in this world, the lines between the mundane and the divine often blur. Each transaction is a reminder of bread's multifaceted role in medieval society. It's an economic staple and a spiritual symbol, a social divider and a unifier. But it's not all sunshine and roses, or in this case, wheat and yeast. The economics of bread are as complex as the cathedral's stained glass, with regulations tighter than a miser's purse strings. You see, Parisian bakers operate under the strict oversight of the Corporation of Bakers, a medieval watchdog ensuring no baker cheats their customers with underweight loaves or subpar ingredients. The penalty for such infractions isn't just a slap on the wrist, it's a hefty fine or, worse, public shaming. Imagine being paraded through the streets with a substandard loaf hanging around your neck like some culinary scarlet letter. And let's not forget the assize of bread and ale, the medieval equivalent of consumer protection laws. It dictates everything from the price of bread to its weight, ensuring that no baker can exploit a bad harvest or a sudden spike in demand. It's a dance of economics, politics, and public relations, with bakers like you caught in the middle. You've got to keep your loaves consistent, no matter if the grain prices are soaring higher than a troubadour's ego. The myth of the idyllic marketplace, where fair trade and honest dealings are the order of the day, is as believable as a dragon sighting. The reality is fierce competition and occasional scandal. The marketplace is a battlefield, with bakers jostling for the best spot to sell their wares, hawking their bread with more zeal than a crusader on a mission. It's a place where rumours spread faster than fire, and a single slip-up can mean the difference between a bustling stall and a deserted one. And you're not just competing with fellow bakers, you've got to watch out for the sly street vendors who might be peddling yesterday's bread as today's fresh batch. Even in this chaotic scene, you find moments of camaraderie among your fellow bakers. You exchange tips and tales, like a guild of flour-dusted storytellers, sharing the secrets of the perfect rise or the latest scandal involving a noble and a pastry chef. These moments remind you that while the marketplace is competitive, it's also a community, a web of interconnections that keep Paris running like a well-oiled batter. As the day wears on, the line at your bakery ebbs and flows like the Seine, each customer a thread in the tapestry of medieval life. From peasants to clergy, each one relies on you to fill their tables and their stomachs. It's a responsibility that weighs as heavily as a sack of flour, yet it's also what gives your work meaning. Bread may be a simple thing, just flour, water, and yeast, but in this world it's everything. So, as the sun begins its slow descent over the city, casting long shadows across the bustling streets, you take a moment to pause. You've fed the city, faced the challenges of the marketplace, and navigated the intricate dance of supply and demand. You're not just a baker, you're a vital part of the medieval ecosystem, a provider in a world where food is both a necessity and a luxury. And even though your muscles ache and the soot clings to your skin, there's a sense of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've played your part in the great tapestry of medieval life. The scent of fresh bread still lingers in the air, a reminder that tomorrow you'll do it all over again. But for now, you can rest, knowing that for today at least, you've fed Paris, one loaf at a time. But don't get too comfortable. The night brings its own set of challenges, and the life of a medieval baker is nothing if not a constant cycle of effort and reward, with just enough magic sprinkled in to keep you coming back for more. As the city settles into the evening lull, you prepare for what tomorrow will bring. A new day, new loaves, and new stories waiting to unfold. As you brace yourself for another round in the medieval wrestling match of bread-making, the afternoon sun casts a golden hue over Paris, almost as if it's trying to soften the harsh realities of your world. But let's not get too poetic here. You're more likely to trip over a cobblestone than a verse. As the day rolls on, so does the political climate, which, much like a medieval banquet, is a mix of grandeur and indigestion. Enter King Louis IX, the man with a crown and a mission, sometimes known as St. Louis for his devout piety and other times as the guy who tried to ban gambling. Yes, you heard that right. Louis was zealous about his faith, to the point where he might just have scolded you for rolling dice at the tavern. Under his reign, France saw a lot of changes, and your bread business wasn't immune to his royal touch. Taxes, for instance, are the eternal thorn in the side of every hard-working soul, and you're no exception. The king's need for coin to fund everything from crusades to cathedrals means you're contributing a chunk of your hard-earned deniers to the royal coffers. It's the medieval version of a subscription fee, mandatory and occasionally frustrating. Louis's reign also brings about the assize of bread, a regulatory ordinance you can't ignore even if you are tempted to. This decree is meant to ensure fair bread prices and quality, keeping bakers honest and customers happy, or at least less angry. Think of it as the medieval Consumer Protection Act, but with more flour and less bureaucracy. The assize dictates the price and weight of your loaves, and woe betide any baker caught skimping on the dough. If your bread's underweight, you might find yourself in the stocks, enduring a medieval Yelp review from passers-by, complete with rotten tomatoes. This regulation has a ripple effect on your standing within the guild. As a member of the Corporation of Bakers, you're bound by its rules and supported by its community. The guild is your safety net and your disciplinary board rolled into one. It's a balance of camaraderie and competition, where sharing tips on grain suppliers goes hand in hand with side-eyeing the baker who's just a little too successful. The assize helps uphold your reputation, but it also means less room for error. One slip-up, and you're the talk of the baker's row for all the wrong reasons. Let's not forget the social aspect of all these ordinances and taxes. King Louis IX's policies have a way of turning Paris into a medieval pressure cooker. The assize of bread is as much about maintaining public order as it is about fairness. A good loaf at a fair price keeps the peace, preventing the kind of unrest that sends peasants storming through the streets with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Bread riots are a real threat, and a baker caught on the wrong side of public opinion might as well start packing for a one-way trip to obscurity. Amidst all this, your relationship with fellow bakers becomes a complex dance of competition and cooperation. You're all in the same flour-dusted boat, battling the whims of weather, politics, and public sentiment. While you might exchange recipes and gossip, you're also keenly aware that their success can sometimes mean your loss. It's a delicate balance, like trying to keep your sourdough starter alive in the dead of winter, a task that requires both skill and a bit of dark humour. The afternoon sun wanes, casting shadows longer than a troubadour's ballad, and you find yourself reflecting on the peculiar blend of faith, economics, and politics that defines your daily grind. King Louis IX might be a saint in some circles, but to you he's a figure whose policies are felt in every kneaded loaf and every taxed denier. His reign has left an indelible mark on your life, shaping the way you do business and the way you see the world. Yet, for all the challenges, there's a certain thrill in navigating these waters. You're part of a living, breathing city, where each loaf of bread is a small act of defiance and a testament to your resilience. You're not just a baker. You're a participant in a grand, ongoing drama where every day brings new challenges and new stories to tell. As the day begins to cool and the hustle and bustle of Paris starts to wind down, you take stock of what you've achieved. You've battled the political currents, upheld the assize, and kept your standing within the guild. It's a small victory, but in a world as unpredictable as this, every victory counts. You're not just feeding Paris, you're shaping it, one loaf at a time. And as the last rays of sun disappear behind the rooftops, you prepare for the evening's tasks. Because in this world, rest is as fleeting as a troubadour's fidelity, and tomorrow will bring its own set of challenges. But for now, you can savour the satisfaction of a day well spent, of a city fed, and a baker's honour upheld. You've earned your respite, fleeting though it may be, and with it, a moment of peace in the ever-turning wheel of medieval life. As the final glow of the sun dips beneath Paris's skyline, you secure your bakery shutters with the practiced motions of a man who's done this dance 1,000 times. The city gradually unwinds, settling into a more subdued hum, but let's not kid ourselves. The medieval night is far from peaceful. If anything, it's the time when the unsavoury aspects of city life come crawling out like rats from the sewers. But for now, you're heading home, eager to leave the day's chaos behind. Your home isn't far, just a short walk through the winding streets, but in medieval Paris, even a short journey is laced with potential adventure or misadventure. Passing by the tavern, you catch snippets of drunken laughter and the occasional off-key loot, a reminder that for some, the day's work ends with a pint, not a prayer. The cobblestones beneath your feet are uneven, a medieval obstacle course requiring more concentration than you'd like after a long day. You might romanticize the idea of quaint, narrow streets, but in truth, they're more like medieval ankle traps. As you reach your abode, you're greeted by the rustic charm of your living quarters. Let's not sugarcoat it. Quaint is often a euphemism for cramped and cold. Your home is a testament to the medieval struggle between comfort and practicality. It's a single room lit by a fire that's seen better days, its warmth doing battle with the chill that seeps through the stone walls. The romantic notion of a simple life is quickly dashed by the reality of drafty windows and a bed that's more straw than mattress. The contrast between the idealized medieval life and its reality is stark. The myth of a peaceful, uncomplicated existence is as inflated as a minstrel's ego. Daily life is a grind, a relentless cycle of labor and survival. Your home, like many, is shared with extended family, and privacy is a luxury as rare as a dragon sighting. The concept of me time is about as foreign as a potato, a new world wonder yet to be discovered. Yet there's a peculiar beauty in this reality too. The simplicity of life means your priorities are as clear as the Seine on a rare, pollution-free day. Food, shelter, work, and community. These are the cornerstones of your existence. It's a life stripped of modern complexities, but it's also one that leaves little room for error. A bad harvest, a bout of illness, or a political upheaval could easily tip the scales from subsistence to survival. Reflecting on the day, you realize the profound role bread plays in this world. It's not just food, it's a social equalizer and a status symbol, a staple and a luxury. Bread is the literal and figurative sustenance of medieval society, fueling both body and soul. Without it, the city of Paris would grind to a halt faster than a knight at a jousting match with a broken lance. As you settle in for the evening, you find yourself pondering the legacy of bread and bakers like yourself. Bread has been a constant throughout history, a simple yet essential part of daily life. From the grain fields of ancient Egypt to the bustling streets of Paris, it's an enduring symbol of civilization itself. And bakers? We're the unsung heroes, the invisible hands that keep the world turning, one loaf at a time. The endurance of bakers throughout history is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. We've weathered changes in politics, economics, and technology, adapting our craft to meet the needs of our time. Whether bound by the strictures of a medieval guild or reveling in the freedom of contemporary artisan baking, the essence of our work remains unchanged, to feed, to nourish, and to bring people together. In a world where the only constant is change, bread is a comforting reminder of continuity. It's a bridge between past and present, a shared experience that transcends time and culture. From medieval guilds that regulated every aspect of the trade to today's independent bakers who experiment with flavors and techniques, the craft has evolved, yet its heart remains the same. As you drift off to sleep, the sounds of Paris fading into the background, you find solace in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring another day of challenges and triumphs. The life of a baker is one of perseverance and passion, a journey marked by the daily rewards of hard work and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. You're part of a legacy that stretches back through the ages, a lineage of bakers who have shaped and been shaped by the world around them. And as you close your eyes, ready to embrace the brief respite of sleep, you know that no matter what the future holds, the spirit of the baker will endure. After all, in a world that's constantly changing, bread and those who make it remain a timeless constant.